Hey guys, you are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see second part, what if Deku had a quirk that summoned powerful weapons. Here is short summary. When Izuku Midoriya first activated his quirk, it was to save his best friend was falling into a river. His quirk was the ability to summon various weapons with a unique power associated to each of his wepaons, the perfect quirk for a hero. Unfortunately, someone took notice of the boy, and tried to turn him into something he wasn't. This is how Izuku Midoriya rose up and became a hero. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. Without another word, the ice-cold teen walked through the frozen doors of the building, laying his left palm against the door as the ice began to steam and evaporate. Saying nothing as the water dripped, he entered the frozen lobby, his boots crunching against the ice as the two began to search the rooms on each floor. "I'm not seeing anything. Think they avoided it?" the blonde asked, his tail twitching from the extreme drop in temperature. Todoroki shook his head. "There is no possible chance that they escaped my attack. They're in here somewhere," the two-toned boy answered, his dual-colored eyes scanning the area in search of anything that might lead him to the bomb. "I mean, you saw what Hamato did during yesterday's assessment test. He basically had two quirks. He can make portals, so there's a chance," Ojiro shot back. The cold boy glared at his teammate, ignoring his comment as he continued on his path. Finally the two came to a large room. Opening the door, they saw a frozen shoji, struggling against the ice, his eyes narrowing at the two newcomers. "Where's your partner?" Todoroki commanded, ignoring the bomb for the moment. He needed to show his classmates who was the strongest. Ojiro tried to walk forward, only to be stopped by Todoroki, giving an ice-cold stare, telling him he wasn't going anywhere. "Dude, what the hell? The bomb's right there," the tailed teen said, pointing at the fake bomb. "We're not winning like that. First we're going to defeat the villains, then we'll deal with the bomb," Todoroki said. His tone left no room for discussion as he walked closer to Shoji. "Now, where's your partner?" he demanded again, his right palm coming to life as ice began to coat his palm. His eyes held nothing but anger as he stared up at the taller teen. Behind his mask, Shoji smirked, but before he could retort, a new voice was heard. "Wow, so that's what heroes these days have come to," the voice said. His figure was crouched on a small ledge inside of the room, a sword hung over his shoulders as his metal mask was covering his mouth and nose. Bright blue eyes stared down at the two heroes, before narrowing as a smirk grew underneath his metal respirator. Without another word, the figure leapt down, landing in a crouched position, before standing tall in a lax position. "Rule number 1 about being a hero is protecting the innocent's right," the villain said, shaking his head. "I think it's safe to say you failed that part terribly." A low growl came from Todoroki, before he unleashed another devastating ice attack aimed directly where the villain was just a moment ago. A flash of blue was all the ice user saw, his turquoise eye widening as he saw the boy he just attacked reappear right before him. Sliding to a halt, Izuku came to a stop right beside his teammate, giving him a wink as the ice suddenly shattered to a million pieces. This was a setup. 6 arms were in the air as the tall villain stretched his arms after being frozen, before nodding at his teammate. Without saying another word, the blue katana slashed through the air, creating a portal as the giant walked through. Todoroki knew this couldn't be good. He hadn't expected the two to actually have a plan to combat against his ice. Clenching his fist, he surged forward, frost seeping up his fist as he aimed a punch at his head. Smirking behind his mask, Izuku sidestepped, before running forward only to suddenly drop down to his knees as a white-blue attacked where he once was. Rushing forward, the lone villain pressed the attack, until he suddenly threw his sword directly at the tailed boy. Instinctively, the boy ducked, leaving himself open as Izuku suddenly appeared behind him, creating a portal under his feet as he was beeped up and taken who knows where. Blue eyes shined dangerously at the two-toned teen raising his sword into the air. He pointed its tip at the boy, standing between him and the bomb. "So, you're supposed to be the hero." "I don't see it," Izuku mockingly said, his blue eyes narrowing as taunted the two-toned boy to come at him. A breath of cold air left Todoroki's mouth, before he rushed forward at his assailant. He felt nauseous as the floor beneath his feet gave away, pulling him down into this sea of unbridled energy. Blue filled his vision as the air left his lungs, only for reality to come crashing back down. His back slammed against the hard concrete floor. His tail instinctively wrapped itself around him, protecting him if only slightly from the fall. Above him stood the second villain, Mezzo Shoji, the boy with multiple arms. Groaning, the tailed hero stood tall, grateful for the small opportunity to him to find his bearings, getting into a fighting position like it was second nature. "So, this was your plan, separate us," Ojiro yelled, trying to understand the villain's plans. A mouth formed over one of the multi-limbed boy's arms, a smile blooming to life as the taller boy got into his own fight stance. "Is that what you think?" Shoji responded, before lunging forward, pushing his arms forward hoping to capture the martial arts expert with little difficulty. Unfortunately for the villain, the hero moved faster than he could move, dodging out of the way while simultaneously swings his tail forward, connecting a blow to the taller boy's jaw. The impact sent him stumbling back a few paces, one of his arms coming up to his chin as he rubbed it out. Keeping the silence, the two ran at each other. The martial arts hero leapt high into the air, before suddenly spinning clockwise in the air, keeping his rail close until the last optimal moment, before releasing his tail. The momentum from the movement dispersed the air slightly, creating a small breeze as the tail slammed into a pillar on concrete, the villain narrowly managing to dodge the devastating attack, releasing an equally devastating attack of his own. Landing an American haymaker on the blonde boy's chin, the hero went flying into the air, stars in his eyes as his body instantly went limp. Without wasting a second, Shoji followed up his attack by wrapping his webbed arms around the tailed hero, holding him close as he tried to grab the capture tape in his back pocket. Once the senses of the hero returned, Shoji's grip over him began to fail, his tail acting as leverage as the webbed arms began to slowly open up, until it was just enough room for Ojiro to shoot a small gap, escaping his confines. "Nice try, but it's gonna take more than that," he yelled, slamming his tail against the ground, sending him flying forward as he shifted his body into a spinning kick. Shoji managed to pull his left arm up to block the attack, sliding away slightly from the heavy impact as he grow his teeth. Turns out his tail has super strength, who knew? Twisting his hand, the villain managed to grab a hold of the blonde tail, quickly reinforcing the grip as his other hand grabbed onto the extra appendage, before turning on the balls of his feet. The two began to move so fast they became something akin to a blur, at least until Ojiro shot out like a cannon, colliding against a nearby wall as blood spat out of his mouth. Shoji began to slowly walk over, capture tape in one of his 6 hands as he towered over the downed boy. Gritting their teeth, the tailed boy managed to stand on shaky legs, a small line of blood trickled down his mouth as he stood up, wiping away the blood with a free hand as he glared at the enemy. "Gra!" Ojiro yelled, letting out a way cry as he slammed his tail against the floor once more, sending him flying into the air, before slamming his tail against the nearby wall, shooting him forward like a bullet as he used a super move he created. Ojiro yelled, spinning his body horizontally before suddenly twisting his momentum upwards, his tail connecting under Shoji's chin as his body was sent crashing through the roof. Landing with a huff, the tailed boy looked up, seeing the large-sized hole in the roof as he let out a small sigh of relief. His tail stung slightly, its tip twitching involuntarily at the small amount of pain. A groan was heard from above, spurring Ojiro to take action and launch himself to the next floor, only to see nothing at all. Getting into a defensive stance, his eyes shot around the room, looking for any signs of movement. A chill ran down his spine when he suddenly felt the presence of someone behind him. Twirling around, he swung his tail, only to feel it being deflected as a large fist slammed into his chest. His eyes widened when he didn't see Shoji, instead seeing Hamato, his fists growing bright red as he spun red. "Say. What? Didn't expect that," he asked, lunging forward as he slammed his fists together, his red astro form begging to take shape as the energy began to surround his entire body. Izuku yelled as he rushed forward, "Hot soup!" he yelled, his fist hitting the wall behind Ojiro as the segment cracked from the pressure behind the punch. Taking up the offensive, Izuku began to relentlessly push punch after punch aimed at the hero's chest, striking a few times until he finally landed an uppercut on him. His body laid across the floor, his mind and body out of whack as he desperately tried to get up, only to collapse. Seeing this, Izuku crouched down. Taking out the capture tape, he quickly wrapped the downed boy's arm, signaling that he was captured. Ojiro Masharo had been captured, and is eliminated from the match. It's now currently a 2vs1, with the advantage to the villains. All Might's booming voice said over the intercoms, letting everyone know what just happened. Smiling to himself, Izuku stood up, his sei disappearing as katanas were formed, before slashing through the air and jumped through. A few minutes earlier, Todoroki's eyes narrowed dangerously, glaring at the sword pointed directly at him. "So, you're supposed to be the hero. I don't see it," Izuku taunted, his blue eyes flickering between his opponent and the window. Shifting his stance, sword in hand, he allowed Todoroki to take a step forward, keeping the same distance. Izuku matched the step, moving to the side slightly as his eyes locked into his target. "You're the one who destroyed that Rouge Zero-pointer," Todoroki bluntly said, frost beginning to form over his right arm. Taking a deep breath as he pushed his arm forward, a large barrage of ice aimed directly at Izuku was created in less than a second. Only the ice never connected. Instead, a blue portal formed just to the right of number 2 hero's son. His dual-colored eyes widened as he dodged to the side, barely managing to escape the same ice attack he aimed just moments before. "Yeah, that's me," Izuku answered, his voice low and dangerous as he suddenly appeared right before Todoroki, slashing his sword forward as he disappeared once more. Jumping back, he managed to escape the slash, his breathing calm as he fired up his quirk once more, just waiting for the flash of blue. Seeing the flash, he instinctively ducked, the sword slashing above his head as a few strands of hair were snipped from his hair, the severed strands fluttering to the floor. Gnarling his teeth, Todoroki pushed his palm upwards, creating a large pillar of ice that pierced through several floors, and would have definitely beat Izuku had he not managed to dodge last moment. Dual-colored eyes narrowed at the sight of the giant glacier. Not seeing any signs of the villain, he let out a sigh of relief, the frost on his hand beginning to steam as he walked to the bomb. Only to feel the ground beneath him give way, and blue filled his vision as gravity flipped, and he slammed back first in an unknown location. Upon regaining his bearings, Todoroki immediately recognized this as the first floor, seeing several support structures as he got into a fighting stance, waiting. A scraping noise could be heard, making the hairs on the back of Todoroki's head spring upwards, his heart beginning to increase in beats a minute. Why was he feeling this way? Only one person was capable of making the dual quirk user experience this type of emotion, fear. The scraping stopped as Todoroki felt a hard impact on his stomach, making him stumble back a few paces, a laughter filling the room as the shadows looked like as if they were moving. "I expected more from the great Todoroki." The villain's voice rang out, both disdain and disappointment in the boy's voice. It reminded Todoroki of how his father would refer to him and his siblings. "Shut up," the two-toned boy said, thrusting his right hand forward. A trail of ice shot forward to where he thought the voice originated from. "Missed me," Hamato said, his voice being distorted slightly, leaving Todoroki unable to fully pinpoint where his location was. He stumbled back another step when he suddenly felt another hit on his chest, followed by another strike to his right cheek. The darkness began to surround the boy, the villain's laughter ringing in his ears as his body took over. Instinctively he raised his left arm. A few small flames flickered to life before being immediately dispersed. Todoroki stood still, his left arm still raised as he looked on in disbelief. Why did he do that? Why had he let his control slip even for just a moment? In Todoroki's moment of disbelief, Hamato shot forward, slamming his katana hilt onto the hero's stomach, sending him tumbling to the ground. He looked over the downed hero, blue eyes narrowing dangerously as he studied the fallen teen. "You have fire as well," Hamato bluntly said, turning around as the sword in his right hand began to glow bright blue. In a flash of blue, he disappeared, only to be replaced by his teammate, the multi-armed boy, Mezzo Shoji. In one of his 6 hands, was another blue katana, until it suddenly disappeared in a flash of blue. In a slow movement, Shoji turned around, capture tape in hand as he advanced on Todoroki. A breath of cold air escaped the hero in training, shooting forward as ice erupted from his right leg, its trajectory aimed directly at the villain who jumped to the right, narrowly managing to avoid the attack. Sliding to a halt, Shoji shot forward, ignoring the pain in cheek from the hit that Ojiro managed to land on him just moments ago. Bringing his arms forward into an X formation, he managed to successfully smash through a nearby wall, escaping the frozen inferno that filled the entire hallway that had once been a normal hallway. Crunching was heard as the combat boots stepped on the uneven ice. The hero's right side was beginning to come poetry frost over, his movements slowing down as the taller boy managed to hide behind a wall for the time being. Ojiro Masharo had been captured, and is eliminated from the match. It's now currently a 2vs1, with the advantage to the villains. The voice of All Might said over the speakers, making Todoroki freeze in place, glaring at his right hand, feeling the familiar sensation of his fingers growing numb. Frostbite was creeping up on him. A voice in the back of his head screamed at him to use his left side, to win the match and show everyone what he was shade of. Instead he crushed the voice with the metaphorical boot, clenching his fist as he began to look for his opponent. Finally seeing a glimpse of the hero, he sent forth another devastating ice attack, this time managing to effectively capture the hero, the ice up to his neck as cracks began to form. Todoroki had to admit, Shoji was a strong opponent, but before he had the opportunity to capture the villain, a katana flew through the air, sticking itself in the nearby wall as a trap was set. Instinctively Todoroki shot his head to the right, absent-mindedly sending another wave of ice at the blade, completely encasing it as his focus was shifted. That moment of distraction was all Shoji needed. Soon the ice that made up his prison shattered due to his superior strength, small bits of ice flying out as he freed himself. His body was shivering, his legs shaking as he let out a breath of air, feeling his body beginning to slow from the extreme temperature drop in the room. The sounds of footsteps barely audible to the enhanced hearing individual, leaning to the right as Hamato surged forward, calling upon his quirk as his katanas disappeared, including the one encased in ice, and was replaced by Red Sei. Pushing his weight to the right side of his body, he launched himself high into the air, his right foot pressing against the wall as he pushed off the vertical slab of concrete with enough force to lightly crack it. Todoroki managing to regain control over his instincts locked eyes with the moving blur, raising his right arm into the air, preparing to unleash another attack that would encase the villain. Acting upon instinct Shoji shot forward, managing to distract the two-tone teen just long enough for Hamato to slam his fists together, and unleash his own devastating attack, the giant red fist connecting to the chest of the hero. In an instant, Todoroki felt his entire world spin. This wasn't supposed to happen, he was supposed to be the best, to be the greatest. His back hit against the wall, his teeth gnashing from the impact, before crumbling to the floor, breathing heavily as he felt a thin trail of blood fall down his face. His dual-colored eyes stared defiantly at the person he associated with winning, Hamato, the boy who scored first in the entrance exam, or crushed that zero-pointer like a tin can. He was the person to beat. He clenched his fist, pushing himself to his legs as he forced his quirk to work overdrive on keeping him in on this fight. His entire body was being coated in a layer of frost, the fake ice on his left side cracking as he stood tall, his limbs shaking as he let out a furious yell. In a moment of rage, he slammed his hands to the ground, his palm making contact with the floor before his vision blurred, and he felt a pain on his right arm. Involuntarily his left side heated up, a small amount of steam erupted from his frozen body, allowing him to breathe, even just for a moment before he felt gravity leave him one more, and was thrown back. His body felt numb as his vision began to become clearer, he vaguely felt the feeling of something shattering around his back. Another shape of someone was in front of him, running forward after him as if something was chasing him. He heard a loud rumble, before he felt his body connect to the hard asphalt of the road outside of the building. Wait, how did he get outside of the building? When Todoroki slammed his palm against the floor, two things happened. The first was that the temperature dropped even more, becoming cold enough to instantly freeze someone alive if they didn't have insulation in their suits. And the other, ice erupted in a circle around the hero student, creating pillars as sharp as diamonds that pierced through several levels and destroyed many supports that kept the building standing. The building shook from the sudden ice attack, Hamato's eyes widening as he instantly realized what was happening. Then, only to make matters worse, steam began to come from Todoroki, melting off the frost surrounding his body, but also melting part of the one thing that was keeping the building standing. His body moved before he could even think, his power surrounding him as he grabbed a hold of Todoroki, before flinging him backwards towards his teammate. This building was going down, and Ojiro was still on one of the floors above them, and he didn't remember the exact location of where the downed boy was. Slamming his fists together once more, he gathered all the kinetic energy he could, his red form growing as he increased the energy into his sei, hoping that he had enough room to hold up the building long enough for help to arrive. All Might was watching the battle take place. All Izuku had to do was hold up a several-story building for a few moments, no problem, right? His muscle bulged immediately upon placing his hands on the roof, squatting slightly as he tried to disperse the weight evenly along his body. He grit his teeth, his red eyes glancing to the side, seeing that Shoji and Todoroki were about to exit the building, and then the full weight of the building hit him. He grunted as he felt the building shift, another loud rumbling as he yelled. Most people would have thought that he would be able to hold up a building with ease, especially after seeing everything that he was capable of, down to destroying that zero-pointer and his scores in the assessment test. They would be wrong. The way his astro form worked was the larger he was, the stronger he was, and he could barely get over 7 meters due to the room size. Any bigger and he risked the building becoming even more unstable. So he stood strong, bearing the searing pain he felt as his quirk desperately tried to activate more power, fighting as he stood tall, waiting for help to arrive. I am here. Izuku let out the smallest sigh of relief. He knew Ojiro would be saved, and that's all that mattered. Chancing a look at his hero, the look of concentration and pain was etched on his face. Sweat poured down his face as he looked right into the eyes of the number one hero. Ojiro's still in here, he yelled. To say he was astonished would be an understatement. To see such potential in these young men, it filled him with hope for the future. He knew that sooner or later, the symbol of peace would retire, and he needed someone, or someones to fill his place as Japan's protector. He knew of the power that young Hamato held, but he didn't expect such attacks from young Todoroki. From freezing the building in his first move, to every other attack he dealt. Of course there were problems. He was attacking recklessly, and it cost him greatly. Sir, shouldn't you call the match? Young Mina asked, pointing to a monitor screen that showed a captured Ojiro and a downed Todoroki. All Might was about to respond, only he saw the former move slightly, a smile forming on the number one hero's face as he addressed his class. Young Todoroki has not surrendered or been captured, so the match is still, All Might began to say, only to get interrupted when he felt the air around him drop several degrees, whipping around instantly as he saw the damage that his student dealt. The hero's jaw dropped slightly, not because of the absolute power that was unleashed, no, because the attack had damaged the building's entire support, and it was beginning to crumble. In the blink of an eye, Hamato sprung forward, creating his astro form, and attempted to hold up the building, but not before throwing Todoroki out of danger. Without another word, the number one hero jumped into action, his cape flowing behind him as he left his stunned students to their own devices, arriving at the scene in a mere second. The first thing the hero saw was Todoroki cracking into the street, followed by young Shoji running through the hole that was made by the flying teen. Are you both all right? All Might yelled, getting a nod from Shoji and nothing from Todoroki. He was about to worry more about the dual-haired teen until he heard the building rumble. Without bothering to ask again, he shot forward, entering the building only to see young Hamato struggling to hold up the building. He had seen the video that was online. Hell, he saw the event happen live, but to see the red being in person was a completely different experience. He immediately noticed the shaking arms, shoulders that carried more weight than they could handle, but above all else, he saw the determination in his eyes. Determination that raged like a burning inferno, and that inferno was beginning to slowly dimmer as the boy held out for as long as he could. I am here, All Might announced, getting ready to take the weight before the boy spoke. Ojiro's still in here, Hamato yelled, his red eyes burning with spirit as he dug deep, the area around his fingers cracking slightly from the stress. Understood. Fear not, I will find him. The hero yelled, making a choice that made the most logical sense. Even with his strength, there was a chance that the building wouldn't be able to handle the added strain of transferring the weight between two people. Instead, he fired up his quirk, channeling a larger portion to his legs as he disappeared in a red, blue, and yellow blur. His steps were wide as he speeded through the rooms, remembering exactly where the tailed hero in training was. Going down several halls, he finally found the boy, crouching down beside him before scooping him up into his arms. Immediately he began to look around. Feeling the building shifting each second, he decided the safest bet was to jump through the nearby window, and then return for young Hamato. So that's exactly what he did. Shielding the unconscious boy in his arms, he busted through the window, his speed fast enough for most people to only see a blur as he landed on the ground. Landing in a crouch position, allowing him to absorb the impact, for that young Ojiro didn't suffer any damage from the rough landing. He immediately laid the boy down nearby the multi-armed boy before running back into the building. His blue eyes widened when he saw the state young Hamato was in. It took him less than 30 seconds to find Ojiro, but 30 seconds was still a long time. The crack around the hands were larger than before, a blood-curdling scream coming from the boy as he strained to keep the building up, before the energy began to crackle with more power. His translucent red form began to glow a brighter red, his eyes shining brighter than he ever saw before, and to his amazement, the building began to rise ever so slightly. "Young Hamato, you can let go now. Ojiro is safe," All Might called out, getting a shake of the head from the boy as he held strong. "It's not just this building in risk of collapse," he yelled, his hands beginning to grow as his mass began to slowly expand upward, stopping at his shoulders as his arms enlarged. "If this falls, the whole street call." They were beneath the school water ducts. Granted, it was beneath several layers of concrete and structural support, but what he was saying could potentially have disastrous effects to the school as a whole. But something made the hero question the boy. How could he possibly know about the water ducts? That was far from public knowledge, so how did he know? It was a question for another time, as All Might immediately realized that he couldn't hold out for forever. The sweat dripping down his face was evident enough for that. "Hold on as long as you can. I'll go find up help," the number one hero called out, rushing away from the scene as he hoped and prayed that Hamato could hold up the building for just a while longer. The man had a mission, someone to find. That was the answer to the problem that surrounded both him and all the students of UA. Coming to a halt, he ignored the screams of surprise of the literature students at the sudden appearance of the number one hero. No, instead his eyes zeroed in on their teacher, a man with a Miata ion quirk that changed his appearance to something similar to a pillar. "All Might?" the man asked, looking to his right after the sudden interruption of his lesson. "No time," the symbol of peace yelled, kidnapping the hero as he sped through the halls of UA, speeding right back to Center Gamma at breakneck speeds, dragging behind him the support hero. Skidding to a halt, he spun around the hero to look at the building that was still thankfully standing. An accident occurred during their heroics training. The building's supports were completely destroyed, and is currently being held up by a student. He yelled, the hero teacher shaking his head slightly as he snapped out of his daze. The other hero's eyes narrowed understandingly, the structure of the building being revealed to him as he crouched down, placing all 5 fingers on the cement beauty him. His eyes widened as he took in the damage, before flaring his quick as the floor around him began to raise into the air, before shooting forward and connecting to the suspended building. The action was repeated several more times until the building was safely secured. "Buildings secure," the support hero said, looking back to see nothing as All Might had already run in, skidding to a halt when he saw a panting green-haired teen. He was on his knees, the sleeves of his suit ripped as his stripes were pulsing red, his hands loose as the hung on his sides, his eyes downcast as he struggled to catch his breath. "Young Hamato," All Might called out, quickly coming to the boy's side as he came to one knee, still looking down slightly on the boy, non-verbally asking the question if he was okay. He got a shaking thumbs up in return, a wry smile as the big lifted his head, his respirator slung around his neck as red eyes faded into green ones. He smiled at the hero, before promptly fully collapsing, almost hitting the floor if it wasn't for the hero's large hand to stop him just a few inches from slamming face first into the hard floor. He smiled at the boy, his blue eyes bright as he studied the sleeping form of the green-haired boy. "You did well, thank you young Hamato." In the observation room, a silence overtook the 16 Hero Course students who were watching as the sight took place. Many looked on in confusion, wondering as to why Hamado had such a hard time holding up a building, like it was a perfectly normal thought. A mature girl with a spiked black ponytail had her hand under her chin, gently biting her index finger as she looked on with great interest. Her thoughts being disrupted when the invisible girl suddenly shouted, "Okay, what gives? You guys saw the video of him destroying that huge robot, right?" Hagakure asked, her gloves waving animatedly as she spoke. Wait, was she seriously only wearing gloves and boots as her hero costume? Momo shook her head slightly, before looking back at the screen, her studied mind already running through several scenarios as to why he appeared to be weaker than he previously was. Who hasn't? I mean, the video was on the news for weeks after it was leaked. A boy with straight black hair and weird elbows said. His hero costume consisted of orange shoulder pads, a black bodysuit with white and orange accents. I actually the guy in action, still can't believe he's a student, dude's got a seriously strong quirk. The boy continued, looking at the screens like everyone else. Yeah, he was totally manly in that video. I heard that he was from a totally different battle center too. He literally tracked down the robot like some kind of hunter. I only wish I could be as manly as that one day. A boy with spiky red hair said, sharp teeth, wearing a costume that fully exposed his toned arms, showed his chest and baggy pants. How come he's not using his totally swick swords? A purple midget asked, glancing at the screens, before returning his attention to the frog's girl's chest. It appears he's only able to use one of his weapon sets at a time. Yaoyarozo said, noticing a detail that could be easily overlooked if not careful. Okay, but why isn't he just dead lifting the building? Minuets asked, his eyes looking up at the mature girl's chest, a small amount of drool dripping down his lips. Hey Bolt, you're pretty buddy with him, any ideas? A purple-haired girl with jacks for ears asked, putting the attention on the electric that would be her future teammate when they performed the exercise. I mean, we haven't really talked about quirks, so your guess is as good as mine. Kamimare asked, unsure what else to say. Yaoyarozo shook her head, before her eyes narrowed at the screen, a thought coming to her. Mass, she whispered to herself, her words being caught by the purple-haired girl Jiro. Mass, like body mass, she asked, raising an eyebrow at the heiress. The girl nodded. Perhaps his strength is in proportion to his size. The bigger he is, the more power he possesses. The rich girl mused, nodding slightly at her reasoning. Before she could speak any more, their teacher returned. A now conscious Ojiro and a worried-looking Shoji followed close behind him. We have arrived, and fear not, because both young Todoroki and Hamado are safe, he said triumphantly, resting his hands on his hips as he smiled brightly, easing everyone's concerns with his smile alone. Sir, you said Hamado's okay? Kaminari asked, his hand raised into the air as he asked his question. Indeed, he is in recovery girl's office as we speak resting. He had some minor quirk overload, but not to worry, he will be joining you all shortly. Same as Todoroki as well. Now, let's get started on the next match, the hero said, grabbing the lot box once more, much to the surprise of his students. Nit thought they made their thoughts known. Next we have Team G as the heroes, versus Team B as the villains. Yellow Eyes scanned the hallway in front of him, his yellow blonde hair swishing at the side as he whipped his head to the side, catching sight of his partner as he gave a nod. The two took a step forward, coming at an intersection that split to three separate directions. Kaminari looked at his teammate before asking, any idea where the bomb might be? The electric user asked, getting a thoughtful look from his fellow hero student, Kyoka Jiro. The purple-haired girl smirked slightly, before crouched down as she took hold of one of the jacks that connected to her ears. Without another word she inserted the jack into the wall, her eyes closing as she could see and feel the vibrations surrounding the building. Taking a deep breath she focused on the vibrations that were coming from above her, her jacks twitching slightly when she heard the faint sounds of someone talking. She focused as she fine-tuned the voices, until they were heard in full clarity. Oh come on, ish like such a goosh dish. Someone with a lisp said, and even though she couldn't see them, she wanted to kick whoever said it in the teeth. maybe fix his lisp. She heard the footsteps from the pair, their voices flickering in and out as a loud buzzing was heard, distracting her enough as to not fully make out their plan. Slowly the buzzing began to increase in volume, until finally she couldn't heard anything besides what was on the same floor as her. Not that it mattered much, she got what she needed. Unplugging her jacks, she turned back to the electricity-themed teen with a knowing smirk. Raising her hand, she extended her index finger, jerking it up 4 times to nonverbally tell him that they were on the 4th floor. The two were up against a dangerous threat, and they couldn't be sure as to what the villains might have set up, including some way to listen into their conversations. She then gestured to her ears, making an X motion to tell him they weren't gonna be any good for what came next. Nodding to her message, he turned around, glancing at the different halls before seeing what he was looking for. At the end of one of the longer ways, stood the door for the stairs. A small smile grew on his face, feeling the buzz of his quirk under his skin as he readied himself. Getting up from her crouch, she quickly walked in pace with Kaminari, her jacks extended slightly in front of her to help detect if someone was nearby. Coming to the 4th floor, the pair stopped dead in their tracks. Before them was an obvious trap that it was comical. All across the floor was some type of purple ball, and it wasn't just the floor, no, they were all over the walls and even some on the ceilings. Chancing a look at his partner, Kaminari shrugged his shoulders before taking a step forward, only to be stopped by a hand placed firmly on his shoulder. Note to self, she had a death grip. Her jacks straightened as she pointed at the mysterious orbs, before shaking her head, chancing to speak. "Don't try it, Bolt, remember the midget's quirk," she whispered, making sure to keep her voice low in the chance that the villains were listening to them, and knew where they were. Kaminari blinked, trying to remember yesterday's assessment test, or more specifically, what the purple dwarf's quirk was. He remembered the dude being weird, like really weird. He kept saying things about how each of the girls were curvy in all the right places, even said the invisible girl was probably such a hottie. Kaminari remembered that it had something to do with the purple orbs that adorned the top of his head, the same balls that littered the path in front of them. Kaminari blanched, the worst possible scenario running in his head as a cartoonish version of him accidentally touched one, and proceeded to blow up. He instead said, opting to go the dumb route instead of making his ideas known. Jiro sighed slightly, rolling her purple eyes as she gestured at the balls again. "He said that they're sticky. So don't touch," she deadpanned, looking around for hopefully a better way around that going straight through the metaphorical fire. Instead of listening to his partner's advice, Kaminari took a step forward, deciding to just push forward with little thought. Jiro blanched. "What the hell? The hell, Bolt?" she asked, watching as he decided to completely ignore her directions and just go head first into the trap. "They're going to expect us to look for another way. They won't expect us to be dumb enough to just go through it," he said back, whipping his head forward once more as he stranded at the floor, carefully maneuvering around the landline of balls. "You're an idiot," she muttered, before abandoning her own plan and following behind the human lightning rod, careful not to touch the balls. After about a minute, a lost shoe and sock, the pair were out of the danger zone, so to speak, Kaminari walking slightly off as he was missing a shoe after doing something stupid. Jiro suddenly stopped, her jacks twitching at the sound of nearby footsteps, looking at her partner who got the message. A nearby shadow was approaching, the size of it behind massive, its owner having to be at least 6 feet tall as it neared the corner. Grunts were heard as the behemoth of a being neared the horizon, the two heroes getting ready as Kaminari yanked his other shoe off, letting him walk normally now as he prepared. "You foolish Hirosh," the villain said, its footsteps loud as it turned the corner. The two heroes stare, not seeing anything in front of them. "You dare underestimate me," the villain said, directing their attention to the ground, where a purple elf stood, balls in hand as he raised them in the air, throwing something similar to a tantrum. The two heroes blinked, suddenly remembering that the villains they were facing weren't giants. "You all will pee," the purple midget began to yell, only to get interrupted by the sound of a smack, and the feeling of a shoe hitting him straight in the face, knocking him out. Jiro looked dumbfounded at her partner, who was still in the throwing position as he just flung his shoe at the villain, and knocked him out, with a shoe. Did you just?" she asked, still trying to process the fact that he actually knocked someone out by throwing a shoe at them. That shit only happened in cartoons, not real life. Kaminari didn't help her stupor, as he offered a shy shrugs, smiling as he rushed forward, pulling out his capture tape and quickly wrapped the tape around the purple leprechaun, securing his capture. Mineta Minoru has been captured and eliminated from the match. It's now currently a 2vs1, with the advantage to the heroes. All Might said over the speaks, letting the remaining villain know that she was now alone. Turning around to see his teammate, he gestured his head forward, smiling as she quickly snapped out of his stunned state. She crouched down once again, sticking her jacks into the floor only to immediately recoil at the sound of a loud buzzing noise, much louder than it had been when she checked earlier on the first floor. No good, something's creating a noise that's hurting my ears, she nervously said, glancing away from her partner before her jack suddenly twitched. Her eyes widening when a hand emerged from the shadows that littered the hallways. "Bolt, get down," she yelled, being too late as the hand got a hold of the boy's shoulder, pulling him into the dark as he let out a very manly yell, as one of his classmates would call it. The sound of something hitting against flesh was heard until silence filled the air. To say she was freaking out would be an understatement. Her jacks began to swing wildly around her head, looking for any hint of location from the villain. A small part of her was relieved that All Might hadn't said that Kaminari was eliminated, meaning there was a chance that he wasn't completely immobilized yet. The crackling of electricity quickly filled her enhanced hearing, her eyes going wide as she suddenly ducked, seeing a yellow and black blur slam into the nearby wall. Getting up with a groan, the radio antenna on his head being bent as he tossed it aside, his eyes narrowing as he stood up, his palms flickering. "She's got a cannon," Kaminari yelled, getting into a defensive position that Hamato had taught him the day before, his hands balled into fists as he waited for the imminent attack. Just like he predicted, a hand shot forward, aimed directly for him, keeping the villain hidden in the shadows still as she tried to sneak attack him like before. This time he managed to rotate his body to the side. Seeing the opportunity, he grabbed a hold of her wrist, remembering what his firm had taught him that very morning. He dug his hand into her wrist, hitting the nerve as his other hand grabbed a spot on her arm, and then he pulled. Only, instead of flinging the villain over his back like Hamato had done to him earlier, her hit the ground hard, a metal staff pressed against his neck as the villain made her presence known. Onyx's eyes looked down at the hero under her heel, both literally and figuratively, the metal staff in her hands that she pressed against his neck, keeping him down. Her silky black hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and her costume was revealing. Her chest was exposed in a red leotard, a utility skirt around her waist with a literal book over her was definitely a fashion statement. "Weird," she demanded, pressing the metal rod harder at his neck. Kaminari immediately raised his hands, seeing something in the corner of his eyes that made him smile, confusing the raven-haired beauty momentarily. Her eyes snapped to her right, seeing the punk girl approaching with her arms out, her jacks extending as they plugged into some kind of devices attached to her hands. Yellow lightning began to speak in Kaminari's eyes, before he placed a hand on the staff that pressed against him, using the moment to fire his quirk against the metal, resulting in the villain taking a step back from the shock. Not wasting this moment, Kaminari scrambled to his feet, watching as his partner rushed forward, before sliding to a halt as she slammed her fist straight into the floor. The ground shook as she focused her heartbeat, pushing the rhythm out of her jacks that connected to the amplifiers on her hands, knocking back the villain once more as she stumbled slightly. "Go, find the bomb," she yelled, not letting up on her sonic attack as she once again fired up her quirk. "On it," Kaminari yelled, getting up to his feet with some effort as he began to shakily run, just managing to avoid the range of the sonic attack. Noticing this, Yaoyarozo's skin began to light up a myriad of colors, until an object suddenly fired out of her arms, slamming against the wall right in front of Kaminari. The object flew at insane speeds that the hero narrowing managed to dodge the attack, stopping dead in his tracks thanks to the extra traction of his bare feet. Looking down, he had exactly one thought. "Wait, is that A?" he asked, before a small explosion was heard as the went flying backwards. "Bolt," Jiro yelled, her shock stopping her attack against the villain, as she threw her staff right at the purple-haired girl. Ducking to the side, she escaped the ranged attack, seeing the villain approach as the skin surrounding her chest began to sparkle colors similar to that of a rainbow, and suddenly, she was face to face with a medieval weapon, a ing cannon. Her eyes widened, the feeling of metal pressing against her nose as she stared wide-eyed at Yaoyorozu. Wield, she demanded, a wire in hand. Jiro knew the second that wire was pulled, she was in for a world of pain, wasn't she? Yaoyorozu looked down at the punk girl, seeing that she had no chance of winning. She smiled softly to herself, before pulling out the capture tape she had. Little did she know, one of the girl's jacks was beginning to slowly creep under the cannon, until wrapping around her heeled boot. This was a risky gamble, but one that had a somewhat high chance of working. When the villain lowered her guard slightly, moving closer to easily capture Jiro, she pulled on her jack, knocking the villain footing from under her. The heiress fell to the floor, her grip loosening on the firing mechanism as Jiro leapt up to her feet, chancing a glance behind her at the Kaminari-size hole in one of the nearby walls. Her attention was quickly shifted back to the villain, who was now back on her feet and advancing quickly as she created yet another item. This time something that resembled that of a pre-Quirk weapon, a flintlock if Jiro's history teacher knew what he was talking about. Only instead of bullets, she loaded in some kind of green ball, about the size of a gumball. The gun was aimed at the hero, the trigger pulled at its ammunition was fired, slamming into the wall behind her as a green substance exploded out of the bullet. The substance quickly covered the girl, before hardening, trapping her in place as she glared at the villain. She walked forward, the clicks of her heels echoing in the empty hallway, well empty besides the cannon. Jiro pulled her head back as far as it could go, it being the one of the few part of her body that's ants covered in the green substance. The tape neared closer and closer, barely an inch from her skin when her eyes widened, a smirk spreading across her face that momentarily stunned the rave beauty. "Why are you?" she began to ask, only to suddenly spin around, seeing that Kaminari had gotten back up. Small bolt of yellow electricity danced across his body, his hand flexing as the power flowed into a controlled area in his hand, the lightning growing in size and power as his yellow eyes glowed a toxic yellow. Before Yaoyorozu could do a thing, Kaminari slammed his right hand against the floor, the electricity exploding violently against his palm as a wave of lighting spread across the ground aimed directly at the villain. He felt his mind beginning to haze, he had used too much of his power, his vision was becoming drowsy as he stumbled to his feet. He vaguely saw the form of Yaoyorozu get hit with the current of energy, stepping forward he nearly fell face forward, his eyes wide as if he was high or something. Finally making his way to his captured partner, he grabbed a hold of a piece, and began to pull with all his strength, felling the unknown green compound began to crack under his grip. He continued. Soon a loud crack was heard as a giant chunk of the trap hit the floor, giving Jiro enough room to stick one of her jacks into the green substance, vibrating it as it began to shatter. He smiled warmly at Jiro, he was sure some snot was running down his nose but he couldn't really care right now. He vaguely saw her smile at him, a warm feeling spread into his cheeks and heart as she took his hand, and began to lead him until he regained enough of himself to run independently. The two checked each room, until finally coming into a room that had the fake bomb, the two villain currently out cold as the two neared the fake weapon. Upon placing a hand on the weapon, All Might's voice rung over the speakers once again. The hero team's wins. Please report back to the observation deck for your evaluation. The symbol of peace said with pride in his voice at his student's work. Well, looks like our job is done, Bolt. Jiro said, heading back to where the two villains lay. Seeing that Yaoyorozu was starting to get up, she began to help her get her feet. Meanwhile Kaminari stood over Mineta, lightly kicking him in the side with his bare feet. How hard did I hit him? Kaminari asked himself. Seeing his partner and one of villains heading his way, he slung the purple boy over his shoulder. A small woman held in her hand a cane that looked exactly like an enlarged syringe. She stared at the boys that decided today was an optimal time to render themselves unconscious from Quirk overuse. Nothing would please her more than to smack that boy Toshinori in the head with her comically large syringe, a practice that quickly made her the most feared hero in the school. Not even Nezu could compete with her when she was truly angry. The first to awake was Todoroki, his quirk already doing the majority of the work as his left side heated up his body to prevent frostbite. Meanwhile Hamato was still lying down in the hospital bed, his symptoms from quirk overuse, meaning there was nothing more she could do besides strap him to an IV, and wait for him to wake up on his own. After giving the dual-haired teen a lecture on safety and quirk usage, smacking him in the head for good measure, she dismissed him. Now she was going over some medical files as she waited for her other patient to wake up from his slumber. Slowly his green eyes began to flutter open, blinking until his eyes finally adjusted to the bright room that made up the infirmary. He groaned as he sat up, his hand going to his head as he rubbed out the tiredness in his green eyes. Looking around he immediately recognized her youthful heroine. "How long was I out for?" was the first thing he asked, tossing the blankets to the side as he shifted his body to the side, his feet now dangling off the side as he rolled out his shoulder. Recovery girl hummed, looking at her notepad as she answered. "Less than an hour. After I make sure you're okay, I'll let you rejoin your class," the school nurse said as she pulled out some gummy bears from her purse, offering them to the young man who gratefully took a few with a small smile. "These will help you regain some of your energy," she said, watching as he popped them all into his mouth, promptly chewing before swallowing them all in one gulp. She smiled softly, grabbed a pen as she began to examine the boy more thoroughly. "Mind telling me exactly what happened, dearie?" she asked, checking the boy's pupils to ensure that there wasn't a problem with his vision for whatever reason. "Heroics class got out of hand, so I held up a building. Guess you could say I couldn't floor to the challenge," he said with a smile. Recovery girl had to suppress a snort. That joke was something that her husband would say. "I see. Well, it appears that you're in perfect health, Mr. Hamato. You're free to go," the youthful heroine said, putting away her clipboard as she gave the big room to stand. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. At least he was polite, Chio thought with a small smile, watching as the young hero in training walked off. "Oh, and young man," she said with a sickly sweet grandmotherly smile. Seeing him turn around, she smacked him in the head with her cane. How she managed to hit him in the head while not moving would confuse everyone but Nezu, making it even more terrifying. "Make sure you don't make this a habit," she demanded, resting her hands on her cane as she gazed upwards at the boy. His green eyes flashed with something she couldn't quite place, before getting a nod with a small sad smile. After the boy left, Recovery girl looked at the door for a moment. That boy was most likely going to drive her to retirement, wasn't he? The room was filled with every child's dream. Several of Japan's most popular heroes were all gathered together, under the super of their rat overlord, of course. Shots Aizawa, the tired hobo teacher of Class 1A, was currently bundled up in his sleeping bag, his tired eyes closed as he tried to savor the few moments of quiet time he had before his best friend showed up. Woo-hoo, the underground hero sighed, sitting up as he groaned, "So much for peace and quiet. Ah, excellent, now that we're all here, we can begin," a small creature known as Nezu said, banging a small wooden hammer against his overly large desk, his high chair raised as he spotted a smile. "And so commences our meeting of the secret cabal," the rodent in a suit said. The being of unbridled chaos smiled, his black beating eyes shined dangerously as he straightened out his fitted suit. The rat-bear-mouse thing was known all throughout the world, and that wasn't a good thing. There were stories that Aizawa would have preferred to have never heard. His boss was someone he never wanted to cross. "We are not a cabal," Aizawa muttered into his scarf, leaning against the nearby wall as he melted from his sleeping bag. A small laugh coming from a longtime friend, Nimori Kayama, aka the pro-hero Midnight. Her hero costume being remarkable similar to that of a dominatrix costume, her whip on her hip as her long purple hair was styled to look as appealing as ever. Her blue eyes shined with amusement behind her red glasses, her devious smile on her face like usual. "Ah, Sho, you don't want to be in the secret cabal with us? I hear we get to punish our students mercilessly," Midnight said with a smile that would make most men sudden in fear, and a purple midget dwarf nearly wet himself from either both fear or arousal. The underground homeroom teacher gave his friend a tired look, already being down with the conversation as he saw his other friend, the human cockatoo, enter the room as well. "Tafar?" the heroine asked, her demeanor doing a complete 180 as Aizawa nodded at her words. Sorry I'm late, the little listeners had some questions. The radio hero known as Present Mike said, slumping into one of the few remaking chairs, sitting alongside the ghost man of Ua. No troubles, Present Mike, let's begin, shall we? Nezu rhetorically asked, laughing slightly to himself as he pulled up security footage from the entrance exams from nearly a month ago. Maijima, what were your findings of the recovered computer systems from the zero-pointer that went rogue? A man of smaller height, wearing an excavator-like helmet and large orange gloves, stood up, his hero costume consisting only of his jeans, gloves and helmet. Upon first glance nothing seemed overly wrong, the core wasn't tampered with, and neither was the actual targeting systems. The support hero began, having everyone's attention as the screen behind him played a recording of Hamato destroying the zero-pointer. The only thing I could find was the increase of power in the batteries, but besides that nothing was innocent with the systems and circuitry. What are you saying? A gruff voice said, his build large, he had sharp white hair and pointy K9 teeth that definitely told a story. This was the hero known as Vlad King, the homeroom teacher of One's sister class, Class 1B. What I'm saying is that this wasn't an accident by any means. Powerloader finished, getting a few looks of concern flash across the teachers' faces. That's quite the claim, do you have any proof? Nezu, the rat principal of Ua, asked, his soft paws clamped together as he leaned forward slightly. The robots are only capable of processing 500,000 watts of electricity for safety concerns. The power inside the few remaining power cores nearly tripled that power output. Powerloader said, his gaze upwards as he looked at the projector that was showing replays of that incident. If I had to make an educated guess, I believe someone tampered with the power, sometime between when the zero-pointer was first taken care of, and about a minute before it reappeared. The support hero said, looking towards another of the pro heroes gathered. Ah, that is most concerning. It appears we have a problem with our security system. Hound dog, did you sense anyone who shouldn't have been there in that day? The rat asked, his black beady eyes staring into the souls of the large K9 hero. No, but I was dealing with a lot of kids who were causing trouble. It is possible that they appeared in the middle of the chaos and disappeared before I could get a hint of their trail. The hero said, his large mouth behind the muzzle he wore for protection. I was afraid that would be your answer. It appears we have more work cut out for us this year than I previously thought. Jetting A adjourned, Nezu said, slamming his small hammer against his desk, once again bringing the jetting to a close, every pro hero leaving the room before Nezu raised one of his fluffy paws. Oh, and Aizawa, a word? He asked, knowing full well the tired hero had no choice but to agree. Aizawa sighed, his tired eyes catching sight of sympathetic glances directed his way from his close friends as he sat down before the principal. Yes, sir, he asked. Meanwhile, in New York, an armored man sat on a large throne, the purple accents of the chair doing nothing to ease the concern that the shaking prisoner had as he looked up at his master. Dried blood covered his body as his wounds began to reopen, the chains wrapped around his neck as a large hand held onto the makeshift collar and leash. With a tug the man fell forward onto his knees. That's all I know. I swear, the chained man said as he shook like a lead, feeling the sensation of sharp bone against his skin as he begged for mercy. Please, master, I swear I'll never. The man stopped, looking forward with fearful eyes. The armored man stood up. A large purple cape flowed behind him as he descended from a small staircase. From behind his helmet his gaze was empty, standing before his prisoner as he clenched his fist, the sound of metal scraping against metal as long blades of iron shot forward from a gauntlet on his right hand. Without saying a word the warrior placed the man's head between the two petrifying blades of steel. You beg for your life, yet still you refuse to accept that your actions have consequences. Zether, find his family, blood must be paid in full. The armored man said, not looking behind him as one of his own warriors obeyed his command. And no, the man didn't get to finish, the sound of another blade coming out of a gauntlet, and the familiar taste of copper filled the air as the man's body slumped, his head decapitated as blood poured from the neck. Bradford, clean this mess up, the armored man said, his cape swishing behind him as he turned around, his metal boots clinking against the staircase as he approached his throne once more. "Right away, master," a large creature said, before bowing and left. The warrior's body shifted to the right, sensing someone's presence as a cloud of black fog began to appear in the room. The armored man didn't show any sign of fear as he looked into the pure yellow eyes that were being formed, until he was staring down a man made of pure mist. The trespasser was wearing a fitted suit, his body consisting entirely of some smoke. In an instant he was surrounded by men in tight suits. The insomnia of a foot won their faces as they aimed katanas at the man. "Oroku Sake, my master requests your assistance," the midst man said, bowing as the man who ruled New York looked down at the man, his blades slowly retreating back into his gauntlets, clearly interested in what this trespasser had to say. "Speak," he commanded, letting the man breathe slightly as his soldiers backed away a pace. His green eyes wandered around the halls that made up UA. The various doors that led to different classes, some being history, support or even heroics, the most coveted learning position in this school. A position that just so happened to be this boy's occupation, Izuku Midoriya, or Yanaki Hamato as he called himself now, current hero student and future hero in training. Today had been a total mess if he was being completely honest. From starting the day off right with his new friends. He thought they were his friends. It had been a while since he had actual friends besides his pseudo-brothers in New York. He smiled softly to himself as he thought about the two people he thought fondly of. From the human lightning rod, Kaminari Dekni, a boy that could give Mikey a run for his antics, a snort escaped his lips as he remembered how he was buried alive by piles of trash just hours earlier. In contrast, the boy he said was his new brother, Hitoshi Shinso, was just about the complete opposite, quiet but full of a dry sense of humor he appreciated. Then later that day he had his first heroics lesson, with the man, the myth, the legend All Might himself. A man that Izuku used to idolize, a man that made Izuku want to be a hero more than anything. Even if his reasons had changed over the years, he still couldn't completely get rid of that All Might fanatic mentality when he first saw the man parade into the classroom. He was pretty sure he had stars in his eyes. And then he was announced they would be doing battle trials, and that he would get to wear the suit he and his brothers spent weeks designing, so far the basis for a perfect day. Then the actual battle began, and to say it went to shit would be an understatement. At first it was working out perfectly, a plan simple in execution but no less effective, and the villains had the heroes on the ropes. Then the world froze over. Todoroki had released a devastating attack that completely destroyed the supports that kept the building they were fighting in from falling. An attack that was so reckless that it risked hurting the other member of the hero team, Ojiro, as he was still upstairs, most likely unconscious, and the building was coming down. His arms were sore. Actually that was an understatement, his whole body was sore. He hadn't had to push his quirk like that in a very, very long time. Still he managed to hold up the building for just long enough for All Might to get help and re-secure the building with the assistance of pro-heroes Mentos. Izuku couldn't help the anger that was building up inside of his chest, the familiar spark of power between his fingers as red lightning danced across his fingertips. His anger beginning to get the better of him as he continued to think about the situation. Todoroki in a dual quirk, rare but not entirely uncommon, he was proof of that himself. But unlike Todoroki, he didn't hate his quirk like the two-toned boy did. His quirk was a tool that he would use to becoming the best pro-hero that he could be. What right did he have to only use half of the power he was born with? Exclamation mark. He saw the hatred in his eyes when he looked at Shoji and himself, completely ignoring the fake bomb that he had an opportunity to get. Instead he wanted to show his superiority over them, crush them into the dirt with left-right side. What right did he have to think that winning was more important than actually acting like a hero? He himself was playing the villain for Pete's sake, and he acted more like a hero compared to the legacy child. Finally Izuku made his way back to the observation room, coming in only about 15 minutes after Todoroki reappeared. All Might and his fellow Class 1A members looked deeply interested in whatever conversation was occurring, not that he really cared about what they were discussing at the moment. Vaguely he heard them talking about how Kaminari did a good job disarming the heiress of Class 1A. Guess he would have to look up the footage at a later time, because right now he had some words to say to the boy who put his own life, and his teammates' life in risk. Todoroki, Izuku said between gritted teeth, inadvertently gaining everyone's attention as the room fell silent. The sound of a pen dropping could be heard from the stiff silence. Todoroki whipped his head around, giving the green-haired boy a bored expression as his eyes lazily trailed over his body. The expression immediately fell when he felt the impact of something hard hitting against his left cheek, shocking the Ice Prince as he staggered back a few steps, the punch drawing blood as it busted his lip. Tentatively Todoroki raised his left arm, touching his cheek as he felt the familiar ruby warmth hit his fingertips as he looked ahead. His fist was still extended, his green eyes glaring into the sound of Todoroki as everyone around looked on with surprise and shock. No one spoke a word as the green-haired boy advanced on the still stunned Todoroki. "You're an idiot," he spat out venomously, his teeth gritting against each other as he had to mentally restrain himself from attacking the other boy. "Young Hamato," All Might began to say, only to be stopped when he saw the look in the boy's eyes. "3 people. You almost killed 3 people, Todoroki," Izuku bluntly said, raising 3 fingers as he looked deep into the chromic eyes of the dual quirk user as he waited for a response. "Shouldn't have gotten in my way," the cold teen said back, his breath cold enough to freeze anyone who might have been nearby. This didn't faze Izuku. No, if anything it only made him even angrier. "They got in your way. That's the excuse you came up with?" Izuku asked, his green eyes narrowed dangerously as he held back a growl that was creeping up his throat. "No," the dual quirk user said, ignoring the freshly inflicted wound on his cheek. He would deal with the bruise it would cause later. "Just you. You made he use my left side," Todoroki accused, taking a step forward as he gazed deep into the emerald depths of Izuku's eyes. "Oh, I get it. You're a stuck-up prick who thinks he's stronger than everyone else in this room, don't ya?" Izuku asked, crossing his arms, his fellow classmates beginning to whisper among themselves at the exchange. "I don't think it. I am. And I'll prove it to everyone that I will be the next #1, while only using my mother's ice," Todoroki said, his tone cold as ice as his fist began to frost, clenching it tightly as he readied himself for another strike. "Yeah, well, you're not Hermano," Izuku deadpanned, glancing between Todoroki and All Might, "and if you think you can take on All Might with half your power, you're a bigger fool than I thought," Izuku said, his teeth straining against each other as his knuckles turned white. "Enough, young Hamato. Apologize for your behavior." And young Todoroki, while I do not approve of the way he delivered his message, Hamato's point does still stand. You cannot hope to be the strongest while only using half your power. Nor can you just blindly attack like you did earlier. All Might cut in, stopping the 2 boys' argument before it could get even more out of hand. Todoroki didn't say anything else as he huffed, turning around without speaking another word as he glared at the #1 hero. "You're wrong, all I need is my mother's ice," he said more to himself than anyone else, his eyes narrowing as he clenched his right hand, dispersing the frost that built up around his knuckles. "And if that's what you believe, then you will never live up to your potential," All Might quietly said, hearing what his student said as his attention was now once again on his students and the next battle trial. "Now, let's get back to business," the symbol of peace said, his hands diving into the box once more as he pulled out another pair of balls. Team C are the heroes, and Team E are the villains. Aizawa sat in front of the principal of UA, his hands clasped together as he fiddled with the metal band around his finger. It was made of stainless steel, and always seemed to ground him when his mind was running a mile a minute. There was something that didn't sit right with the man, whether that was the beady black eyes that could stare into his soul, or it was the fact that no one besides Nezu knew exactly what type of animal he was. Or maybe it was the fact that the rat bear mouse thing had an obsession with tea. Nah, it was probably the fact that he was wearing a tailored suit. "Mr. Aizawa, I'm sure you're wondering why I asked you to stay behind," Nezu asked, taking a sip from tea that he definitely didn't have before. Aizawa sat corrected. The ability to manifest tea was definitely the scariest thing his boss could do. Aizawa gave a small nod, already getting slightly annoyed as he let out a small huff of air. There was so much more he could potentially be doing with his time, instead he was stuck before the one creature that terrified him. Then allow me to get straight to the point, Nezu said, opening the drawer on his desk, pulling out a file. It appears one of your students has a questionable past, Nezu hummed, clasping his furry paws together as his black beady eyes stared deep into the man's soul. Aizawa sighed deeply as he grabbed the folder, flipping it open with his thumb. Instantly Aizawa's eyes widened, his student's name being bold and as he read it out. Minoru Mineta, Aizawa said, his black eyes narrowing as he reread over all the information inside the folder once more, sighing in frustration before closing the file. I'm sure you see the problem, Nezu asked, getting a curt nod from the mouse's favorite employee. A small thin smile spread across the rodent's face, groping and even attempted blackmail. Certainly fine qualities for a hero student, no? Nezu sarcastically asked, leaning forward slightly, waiting for the answer from the underground hero. I didn't know it was this bad, Aizawa said, pinching the bridge of his nose in frustration. This boy should have never even been admitted to his class. If these records were correct, and knowing Nezu they were, then Mineta was a danger to his class. Parents are high officials in the Hero Commission, Explains why these reports weren't in the student files I read, Aizawa reasoned, leaning back as he plopped the folder onto the desk of the principal. What do you want me to do? Aizawa asked, a large part of him dreading his answer. Knowing Nezu, it would be something over the top. Normally I would have you try to curb his behavior. However, in light of his situation, I decided to keep a close eye on him. Or more accurately, I had Frederick keep a close eye on him. Nezu answered, holding out his palm as a small cockroach slithered from underneath his desk, before crawling up the desk and stopped when it reached Nezu's palm, who smiled softly at his companion. Aizawa blanched at this. Not much genuinely surprised him, but you can't blame the man for not foreseeing a cockroach with a mini spy camera strapped to the exoskeleton of the bug coming. You trained a cockroach to spy on people? Aizawa asked, clearly stunned as he shook his head to refocus himself on the more pressing matters. Nezu laughed at the hobo's funny words, his voice cheery and light, the perfect pitch to hide his absolute maniacal tone. Oh my, that does sound quite ridiculous when someone else says it aloud. Nezu mused to himself, petting the head of the cockroach before gently placing the bug on his desk. No, I did not train Frederick of his brethren, they were already trained in the art of espionage long before I found them. Nezu continued, managing to strike more fear into the man that sat across from him. Brethren, you know what, I'm not even gonna ask. What did Frederick find on Mineta? Aizawa asked, sighing in exasperation. Why did his boss have to be the smartest and most maniacal being in all of Japan, quite possibly the world? Oh, quite a lot, Nezu replied, gently removing the small portable camera off his friend's shell. Plugging the camera into his personal computer, Nezu proceeded to turn the monitor around until it was in perfect view for the homeroom teacher. Although, it would probably be best you see for yourself, Nezu replied, hitting play on the recording as the screen shines to life. The floor being seen as the camera panned upwards, getting a clear view of the one and only Mineta. Osh, come on. Don't tell Mesh you never had sesh before, Mineta loudly said, making his partner, Yaoyorozo, the heiress to one of Japan's most important support companies, blush brightly and flinch away. Apparently the midget of a human being didn't get the hint, as he continued to make lewd comments about the girl, making her even more uncomfortable. Somehow Yaoyorozo managed to hold back her emotions, both an impressive and slightly worrying feat, and come up with a plan that was solid enough. From creating a device to stop Jiro from hearing them directly, to having Mineta fill several hallways with his sticky purple orbs. Aizawa's grip tightened on the arm rests of his chair, his black eyes narrowing dangerously at the purple stain on the screen, his latest comment nailing the final nail in his own coffin. You Kanosh, I could totally help you Nosh be a virgin. Just lesh mesh no baby doll, Mineta said, leaving the room to go pursue the hero's team. Aizawa will admit a small, pleased, smile spread across his lips when the shit stain of a human was hit by Kaminari's shoe, knocking him out completely. The man's black eyes focused on Nezu as the recording ended, a thoughtful look on the rodent's face as he cupped his paws together. I'm positive you have a solution for this problem, Nezu asked, grabbing a small puffed pastry, tossing away the wrapper before putting the stuffed cake in front of Frederick. The cockroach excitedly jumped up and down a few times, before diving head first into the white cream of the Twinkie, a pleased chirp coming from the spy bug. Aizawa spared a quick glance at the cockroach's behavior, before his focus shifted solely to the rat principle of UA. Yes sir, I'll make sure Mineta is held responsible for his actions, as well as making sure Yaoyarozo knows that such treatment will not be tolerated. Aizawa determinedly said, handing back the folder back to Nezu before standing up, his black eyes glancing at another folder that was on Nezu's desk. Its title had Problem Child's name on it. Is there anything I should know about Hamato? Aizawa asked, his gaze fixed on the green folder. Not at all, Nezu chirped happily. His eyes narrowed suspiciously for a brief moment. You didn't become an underground hero without picking up a few tricks, one of them being able to know people's tell signs. Nezu's right ear twitched ever so slightly as he answered Aizawa, a twitch that indicated that Nezu had just lied to him, or was at the very least hiding information on the boy. Yet another thing to add to the mystery that was Yanaki Hamato. Aizawa offered a curtly nod, before turning on his heel and headed towards the door that led to the hallways of UA. The alumni of the prestigious school proudly displayed on one of the connecting walls. A certain black-haired man with freckles stood out to the man as he stopped for a moment, remembering the man fondly. You were taken too soon. Hitoshi Shinso was currently freaking out. Why wouldn't he be? It wasn't like he was currently being chased by a robot man. Oh wait, that's exactly what was happening. His purple eyes widened as he dodged under an incoming attack, propelled forward by engines on the metal mon's calves. His kick creating a spider web impact on the cement where his body once was. Surrender, hero. You have no chance at defeating us. Us. Oh shit, there was a second one. Hitoshi thought, seeing a blur of pink and black in his peripheral as something slammed into the insomniac hero teen's chest, temporarily knocking the breath from his lungs. Dragging to his knees, he managed to slid back just barely as he escaped the reach of the two villains' grasp, disappearing into the darkness that was his lifeline. His breathing was rapid as he tried to calm himself. Clearly he was not the absolute being of pure stealth as he hoped. His mind wandering to just minutes prior. So, you're saying your quirk lets you control people like puppets? Ribbit. A girl with large eyes, long green hair stylized in a bow and quite apparent amphibian features. Suyu Asui. Quirk. Frog. She wore a green swimsuit, with dark green accents and frog lips, boots and gloves. Yup, Shinso dryly replied, making a popping sound on the P as he shoved his hands in his pockets. The chains in his gauntlets shifting slightly as he waited for his partner's response to his quirk. Asui placed one of her large finger against her lips, humming to herself as she closed her eyes, deep in thought for a moment. You need a verbal response from them before you can take control though, correct? Ribbit. The frog girl asked, soliciting a small nod from the purple teen, he back against the wall of the hallway they were currently in. I could probably locate the bomb if it's close to any of the windows. I could relay the location to you if I find it. Ribbit. Suyu asked, slouching slightly as she waited for a response. I can probably check in the middle of the floors while you're checking the outside. First person to locate the bomb alerts the other. Shinso asked, smirking slightly as the frog girl smiled at him. Then let's give 'em hell, Shinso said, his smirk breaking into a mad grin as the two began to run towards the building. One last check on his gauntlets, and he entered the building, watching as his partner jumped high into the air, sticking to the side of a nearby wall as she began to climb to the top. She bent her elbows before pushing off the cool wall, twisting her body 180 degrees as she jumped to the other building, continuing her climb as her tongue hung out slightly. Rushing into the building, Shinso pulled up his mask, its design similar to Hamato's in a lot of ways, an almost funny coincidence if you asked him, except it had one key difference. Shinso's had a feature that benefited his quirk. He checked the first floor, only to find nothing. It was same for the next floor, and the next. It wasn't until he reached the fourth floor when he found what he was looking for. The fake bomb in all its glory. A man in armor was guarding the device, a maniacal laughter coming from the villain as he mechanical lifters his hands into the air. Of course, to win this, I must get into the mindset of a villain. The villain, Tenya Iida said as he flexed his fingers, the sight bringing a snort from Shinso's nose. Without wasting another second, he pressed on the communicator in his ear, reaching his partner who was still climbing the building. I found the bomb, 4th floor, 3rd door from the east staircase. Shinso whispered into the mic, or at least he tried to. No sooner had the frog girl responded, did Iida suddenly turn around, his body shifting and tensing until he was in a runner pose. Aha, I knew you heroes would try and stop us. The other teen yelled, before fire began to combust from the armored teen's engine calves, his speed blinding as he fired himself like a cannonball aimed for Shinso's head. And that's how he found himself being externally grateful, that he chose a dark enough purple that could blend in well enough in shadowed places. He remembered when he watched Hamato's trial, the boy managed to get into the rafters and get the drop on the heroes. Why couldn't he do the same? Granted, he didn't have nearly the training his friend had, but he could still do enough to make a distraction, or even better, capture the bomb. His thumb grazed over the hidden button located right on top of his index finger, resisting the urge to press the button now. From his aerial position, he could clearly see that Iida had rendered the room that contained the bomb, leaving the spacesuit-wearing girl out in the halls, looking for him. He didn't know much about her quirk, just that she managed to send the baseball from the practical exam out of Earth orbit. Logically he knew she had some type of gravity quirk, but that was just about it of his knowledge on her, that and she was pretty kind, he could tell that almost instantly. With one last deep breath he jumped down from his vantage point. His makeshift plan required everything to go his way, otherwise it would blow up in his face. Faking all the confidence in the word, he crossed his arms, leaning against the nearby wall, his shoulder firmly pressed against the wall, a certain glint in his eyes as he took one last breath. Wow, and here I thought I actually had competent opponents, guess I was wrong. Shinso said, a small smirk on his face as Gravity Girl spun around in an instant, her face red as she yelled back out. What's that supposed to mean? She began to say, stopping mid-sentence as her eyes glossed over, her body relaxing as her arms fell limp to her sides, a blank look now plastered on her face. His smirk under his mask was large as he stood straight up, walking over to the controlled girl, a flash of green gaining his attention as he saw his partner approaching. She had a small look of shock on her face as she approached, clearly seeing Uraraka's state. She stood tall, giving the space villain a one more look, before speaking. I see you got Uraraka. Ribbit, Asui said, smiling slightly as she saw Shinso shrug nonchalantly. Is that her name? Yeah, guess so, he dismissively said, before gesturing towards the nearby door. Now, I want you to run in there, and get Iida's attention. Shinso said to the controlled girl, not receiving any sign of acknowledgement, he stood to the side, letting Uraraka move forward, her heeled boots clicking as she entered the bomb room. His purple eyes narrowed as he crept around the corner of the door, his fingers messing with the dials that rested on the sides of his mouth gear, until finally, he found the right pitch. I saw Shinso coming this way. Shinso yelled out, his voice sounding exactly like Uraraka's. A pulse flared in his head when Iida answered, letting him know he was in complete control. He blinked a few times before standing up, feeling the beginning of a small headache forming at the back of his head, a side effect he would get when he was controlling more than one person. Looks like we win, Shinso dryly said, walking over to the fake bomb before placing his hand on the fake bomb. Man, I didn't even get to use these, he muttered, looking down at the gauntlets on his hands. The hero team's wins. Please report back to the observation deck for evaluation. The symbol of peace yelled out through the speakers. A small smile was still on Shinso's face as he walked back with his classmates in tow. He was tired, really tired. His arms were still sore after doing the battle trials, but at the same time, he had never had more energy. Could that be associated with being taught by All Might? Probably. Most definitely, that didn't change the fact that he was still pumped about today's results. Being praised by the symbol of peace would do that to just about everyone, and then, he finally got to see his classmates' quirks in real action. When he was younger, he used to be an absolute nerd. Okay, maybe he was still a nerd, but back then he used to study and analyze quirks. He blamed Kachan for getting him obsessed with studying quirks. They were maybe in first grade. And for the first time she was having trouble controlling her quirk. Turns out she didn't just make explosions, she created a nitroglycerin-like sweat that she could detonate at will. Back then she didn't know that her body naturally produced more sweat than the normal person, so all it took was to make sure she didn't have large buildup of sweat, and she was back in the game. Izuku smiled sadly at the memory. He used to have notebooks full of analysis of different pro heroes' quirks, or even just people he knew. He had at least half a book alone on Kachan herself, and the rest of that notebook was about All Might. And Izuku could confidently say, the man was every bit of the symbol he portrayed. He stood in the corner of the room, his eyes darting around the room for a moment before sighing gently, before beginning to remove his hero suit. He wasn't ashamed of his scars, each one told a story, but just because he wasn't ashamed didn't mean he wanted everyone to question why he had them. He heard his classmates talking about the battle exercise, making sure no one was really paying attention. He began to loosen the straps on his shirt, making sure all the hidden weapons were removed first, of course. First to come off were his gauntlets, then his throwing stars and his hidden daggers. Then his shirt came off, his torso being exposed to the cool air of the boys' locker room. A certain scar that had the silhouette of a hand, spiderweb cracks emerging from the fingers and palm that set firmly right under his right shoulder blade and hove his ribs. The cool air made the scar burn slightly, a common occurrence to Izuku if he was being honest. They were called phantom pains, and sometimes his old injuries would flare up. He didn't like it, but just like everything else in his life, he would bear them and use them as motivation. Motivation so that no one would ever go through the same pain he himself went through, not so long that he's still standing. Thank our elder classmates. The purple dwarf, inarguably the most ridiculous hero costume the young ninja had ever seen, so much so he had to do a double taken when he first saw it. A boy with long black hair and weird elbows, Hinata Zero, Izuku's mind provided as the other boy made his way towards Mineta. A confused look was on his face, the helmet for his hero suit rested neatly in his arms. Thank them for what? Zero asked, offering a grin and an eyebrow raise. Our elders have given us a grand treasure, Mineta said, pulling up a corner of the poster only to reveal a small hole. Wait, wasn't that the wall that connected to the girls' locker rooms? Oh shit. Beyond my brethren, kneel down and I shall give you privilege. Mineta yelled triumphantly. Did he seriously expect everyone to kneel before the dwarf? Dude, that's the girls' locker room behind that wall, Zero said, pointing at the wall as his eyes widened. Mineta, have you no shame? There must be a mistake. This must be a test. Surely such a high caliber of school such as UA wouldn't leave a glaring issue. Yes, of course, this is merely a test. We must ignore the armored teen ranted, chopping his arm down in the air with each sentence. Uptight much dude, but he does have a point. Izuku thought to himself, ignoring any further conversation as he focused back on undressing himself. Aha, and now I get my reward. Just think about ish. We get to see Yaoyarozo's boobies. Uraraka's ass, oh, and Mina perky little body. Mineta said in pure elation, before smirking as he crossed his arms, leaning against the wall, having an air of confidence that seemed very misplaced for the small boy. From the corner of his eye, he saw the red-haired eyes widen before narrowing, his fist clenched as bits of his skin began to harden at the mention of his pink friend. You're joking, right? Look, we can't just, Zero tried to say, only to be cut off by the. And don't even get me started on the Class 1B babes. There's a redhead, a religious girl who looks perfect to corrupt. The cutest little mushroom girl my size. And a total flirt who would be amazing in bed. Mineta squealed with happiness. No one said a word as everyone stilled, even Kaminari, who would admit maybe he was too much of a flirt at times, felt appalled. How disgraceful. How would you think saying such a thing was okay to say? Iida said, stepping forward only to stop when he heard the final words of one Mineta Minoru. And don't even get me started on the explosive girl. Hourglass body, long dirty hair, and red eyes. The perfect girl to add to my harem. Mineta squealed, not understanding that he had just sealed his fate. Before anyone could say another word, a blue katana flew through the air and embedded itself into the wall, barely a centimeter away from the boy's skull. Mineta's eyes flew open, his body stiffening as the blade glowed blue. A towering figure stood over him, cold blue eyes stared into the dwarf's soul. The figure had glowing blue stripes along his arms, blue arches of electricity crackled along the blade that was suddenly pressed upon his throat. Wait, when did that happen? Mineta began to panic, trying his best to squirm out of the situation he was in. Whoa, the heck Hamato? Mineta asked, realizing trying to escape was futile. Cold blue eyes narrowed dangerously at the Ed baby, the blade being pressed upon the boy's neck further as he could smell the fear leaking from the boy. The room was silent once more, Todoroki's eyes widening slightly as he looked at the exposed back, noticing the scars being dismissing him once more. Kaminari and Shinso on the other hand, couldn't tear their gaze away from the scene, along with everyone else. I will say this once and only once. Izuku began, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. They aren't many things I hate, but you just made that list. Stop this attitude, or I'll be forced to correct it, Izuku said, releasing his hold on Mineta as he began to walk away. You're just Jilush, Mineta yelled, already pre-ordering his coffin as Izuku stopped dead in his tracks, turning his head slowly as he looked at Mineta. Once I become a pro hero, the ladies will love me. And they'll just despish you. Just you wait, I'll get all the bitch. The feeling of something warm trickling down his cheek stopped the next words dead in their tracks. A small hand touched his cheek only to find a new cut, blood freely oozing out of the new wound. No one saw the hero student move, but a small hint of blade now stained the tips of the glowing katanas. Next time I won't miss. How you even made it into this school escapes me. Just be glad you're still here, Izuku said, turning back around before locking eyes with Shiro. Mind taping up the hole until it's properly sealed up? Izuku asked, getting a nod and the sound of tape being dispersed from elbows. The room grew into a tense silence, only to be broken by the bird of Class 1A. Revelry in the dark. The next day, green eyes shot open at the sound of his alarm, a cold sweat coating his body as his breathing was rapid. His green eyes dilated as he felt his Quirk's energy drum just beneath his skin. Crackles of blue, red, purple and orange energy flickered between his fingers as he calmed himself down. Just another memory, he said to himself, slamming down on his alarm clock as he groaned and got out of his bed, getting himself ready for school. His backpack was slung across his shoulders as he approached the gates of the school, his blue eyes spotting the crowd that was formed around the entire front gates. Fellow students were being bombarded by reporters. Apparently information was somehow leaked that All Might was teaching at UA, and the media wanted the first scoop. Sighing to himself, he pulled out the swords he always kept on him, and began to channel the power into the blades, only to cut himself short when several people ran up to him. Dude, thank goodness we found you, Kaminari said, out of breath as he crouched on his knees. You gotta help USH. Mineta wailed, throwing his arms up in desperation. Jiro shook her head at the Ed boy's comments, but agreed with his words. Not a fan of reporters, she shyly said, tapping her jacks together as she glanced away. Izuku didn't speak, instead looking forward as news hounds began bombarding several other students. Keep your eyes open, take a deep breath. And no matter what you do, never, ever, think about tacos. Izuku said, his katanas glowing a bright blue before he slashed the air, a blue's portal forming as he gestured for them to walk through. Jumping through the time between jumps was within a second, but for Izuku the second would drag on, giving him just enough time to determine his destination and other variables. Thanks for earlier, Ribbit, the frog girl said as she walked inside the classroom. To her side was the insomniac teen with gravity-defying hair. Don't mention it, Asui, Shinso dryly said, his hands in pocket as he walked forward, his purple eyes catching sight of his desk before walking over towards it. What? Shinso asked, looking back at the unexpected response. My friends call me Sue, the frog girl simply said, sitting in her desk. Before Shinso could say another word, a bright blue portal blipped into existence right in front of his eyes. 4 bodies flying out of the portal, only one shook the landing as the other 3 sprawled out on the floor. Groaning, the slowly got up, rubbing the back of his head before producing a thumbs up, indicating he was okay. Dude, Thanks, but a warning, next time the landing's gonna be rough. Kaminari asked, getting an innocent shrug from the green-haired teen. Not my fault you guys don't know how to portal jump. The freckled boy smirked, putting away his swords as he walked over to his desk, the rest of his portal buddies following suit, Mineta sitting right behind him. Despite helping out the midget, Izuku still was less than happy about the comments about the girls in both their class and sister class. Thanks Hamato, Kaminari said, sitting down right beside Jiro as they waited for the rest of the students. Eventually the tall dark-haired man walked into class, behind him a red-haired boy and pink-skinned girl. Get to your seats, the man instructed. Already having had to deal with the police, there was a reason why he went underground. The tired hobo hated the media. Take this morning as a learning experience. Next time I won't be so forgiving if you're tardy. Hiroshima, Mina, don't get caught up in the chaos that is the press. The man said, getting immediate nods from the two. Enough about that, the man sighed, a hand running through his long dark hair. Good morning. Don't get used to me saying that, it doesn't happen often. I've reviewed your battle trials from yesterday. Most of you did average. The man dryly said, watching as most of his students' faces fell from his honest words. Which is to be expected. If you expect to have perfect performances right off the gate, you're delusional and that needs to be correct. Aizawa said, watching as the light came back to most of his students' eyes. Kaminari, you need to work on the output of your quirk. Your drawbacks will be a liability if you cannot get them under control. The man said, getting an immediate nod from the electric user. Oh, and Kaminari, next time try and keep your shoes on. The man said, eliciting a few silent chuckles. Jiro, well done. Next time don't let your opponent get the upper hand like she did. His gaze swept across the room, landing on the heiress herself. Yaoyarozo, you came up with a sound strategy, but you failed when you didn't account for them going through the obvious traps. Don't let yourself become blindsided by stupid people. Hey, Kaminari shouted, cutting off Aizawa, only to be promptly shut up with a G, or from his teacher. You also overthought your actions. In real-life situations you don't have the luxury of planning out your next attack. Learn to trust your instincts. Aizawa said, Hi sensei. The girl said, bowing her head down in gratitude. Aizawa's gaze now fell upon the great boy. Mineta Minoru. You're expelled. The man dryly said, the classroom falling silent as several pairs of eyes looked at Aizawa like he had grown a second head. What? The small boy wailed, his eyes impossibly wide as he stood up in his seat. Did I stutter? Report to the principal's office immediately for your expulsion papers. The man said, his hand subtly going up around his costume weapon. This wouldn't be the first times he might have to wrangle a problematic child. Why you can't do fish? Mineta wailed, refusing to get up from his seat. Sir, while his actions yesterday in the locker room may have been deplorable, it is highly inappropriate for Ua to simply expel him for such actions. Iida said, standing up as he chopped the air. Aizawa shot the tall teen a glare, activating his quirk as his eyes turned bright red, his hair floating in the air as the scarf around his neck moved slightly. What happened in the locker room? The man asked, blinking as he deactivated his quirk. No one spoke as the man took a threatening step, leaning forward against the small lecture that was in front of the classroom. I ask again, what happened in the locker room? Aizawa asked again, a cold chill running down everyone's spines, all without activating his quirk. He was talking about how it was his right to look at the girls, private spots, and other stuff I'd rather not repeat. Sir, Hamato finally said, deciding to take the bullet and explain to the teacher. The classroom was once again silent, the emotion in Aizawa's eyes changing every second before finally resting on one that would make people's stomachs fill with dread. Is this true? The man asked, the silence being all the answer he needed. In a split second he flew his capture gear forward, watching as it completely mummified the purple midget. Mineta, this school produces only the best of the best. If you're only in it for the popularity and fame, then this school made an even bigger mistake in ever accepting you. The only reason why you even got this far was because I saw potential in you. I thought you could get past your own shortcomings. I wish I was wrong when I say you will never be a hero. The man said, letting the boy down in front of the class, seeing angry tears stream down his face. He felt no sympathy for the boy. People like him were the reason why society was as screwed up as it was. Bastard, the boy muttered, not moving as he glared at the tall man. Aizawa had to admit, for whatever reason, the boy had guts. What did you just say? Aizawa asked, fixing his glare at the boy once more. You bastard. Do you have any idea who my parents are? I'll have your job for this. Mineta screamed, yelling at his former teacher as his hand began to reach for one of the orbs on his head. I do, Aizawa said, flaring up his quirk before wrapping the big once again in his support item, fling him up into the air and back down again towards the ground. And I don't care. The underground hero finished, releasing his hold over Mineta, the capture gear wrapping itself neatly around the man's neck. Your actions are deplorable, and we at UA do not tolerate such behaviors. Get the hell out of my class, you're not welcome here. The man said, watching as the boy cried his way out of his class. He saw many people staring at him wide-eyed, making him even more irritated than he was before. If you all honestly believe that he deserved to stay after his actions, allow me to say this. I don't care what you might think. You don't know the whole story, nor will I be repeating everything he said in the last few days. But I assure you, his words were and I means what he here at UA stand for when he train our future heroes. And Yaoyarozo, Aizawa said, getting even more attention from the dark-haired beauty. Next time anyone speaks to you like that, tell one of our staff, I assure you, such behavior will not be tolerated in the slightest. The man said, getting back to the main topics of the class. Shoji, you did well, next time make that you're not blindsided by an unexpected attack. Ojiro, don't let yourself become undone by an unexpected twist. The man said, looking directly at his resident problem child. Hamato, well done on thinking on your feet. But for Pete's sake kid, don't just hold up buildings in your free time. Aizawa said, pinching the bridge of his head as he sighed, before turning his attention on Todoroki. Todoroki, you have a powerful quirk. But you lack control. No, let me finish. The pro-hero said, seeing that the two-tone boy about to argue his point. I'm not talking about quirk control, I mean control your emotions. You lost sight of your enemy, and threatened everyone that was inside that building. You also didn't use your left side. I hope you realize I expect to see your other half soon, to limit yourself intentionally as irrational. Before Todoroki could respond, Aizawa had already moved on to the next pair. It's not like he would understand why he would never use his fire. This continued until Aizawa had addressed all of his students, the man sighing heavily as his eyes grew tired. Now that that's out of the way, you all have a very important decision on your hands. The man began, stopping for a few moments to build suspense. You all must choose both a class representative and vice representatives. The underground hero explained, watching as his class got into an uproar. Wait for real, a normal activity for once. Zero shouted with a wide smile, bro. I'm defiantly the best pick for representative. Choose me. Someone in the class called out, Mon Amy, surely the shiniest of us must represent our class Mary. The French kid asked, no way, I'm totally the best pick. The alien girl yelled out, much to the annoyance of Aizawa. They weren't understanding the importance of such a role, but before he could speak, the glasses-wearing teen stood up. Enough. This is no way to conduct ourselves. We are students of UA, not barnyard animals, therefore an election is the obvious answer to our dilemma. Iida called out, chopping the air once more, seriously, was the guy really just a robot? One problem there Hermano, we hardly even know each other. The green-haired boy said, turning his head around to look at the robot teen. Yeah, Hamato's right, everyone will just vote for themselves anyway. The invisible girl shouted back. But that means whoever had the most votes truly deserves such a role. Sensei, would you allow us to do a vote? Iida asked, making Aizawa snort at the boys. The man was close friends to his older brother, and the stark difference between the two was quite apparent. Do whatever you want, just decided before I wake up. The tired man said, walking over to the corner, pulling out his sleeping bag who knows where, climbed inside and promptly fell asleep within seconds. Does he have a second quirk? Surely no one could fall asleep that fast. Kaminari asked in awe, a few fellow students nodding to his question, including Shinso. Everyone, please write down the name of who you want to represent us. Iida called out, taking the papers that Yaoyorozu had helpfully created with her quirk. And just like that, everyone had a small piece of paper as we're writing down the different names of our classmates. Iida Tenya was currently in a dire situation. Yes, he wanted the position probably more than anyone, but the truth was, he wasn't the most qualified for such a role. He likely wouldn't be able to motivate his classmates like a representative should, so he was now left with the choice of who he thought was best. A few names rung out in his head: Yaoyorozu, Todoroki, Uraraka, and Hamato. He almost wrote down Todoroki, on account for him being the son of the number 2 hero, stopping when his eyes caught sight of a familiar green hair. He helped save a classmate just the other day, and that was what decided his vote. For Shinso it took less than a second who he would write: Hamato. For several reasons actually, one of them being that he was actually competent in training people, his defensive form was proof of that. And the second reason, with his being class president, then he wouldn't have as much time to torture him with those hellish training sessions. Kamimari thought for a moment before weighting down Hamato. He thought it would be pretty rad if his friend was the class prez, plus he was just a chill guy. Yaoyorozu Momo was initially going to write down her own name, but stopped just millimeters from her page. Something in her gut told her that such a decision might not be the best. Was she qualified for such a position? Considering she was taught by the finest tutors in the world, she thought so, yes. But she lacked one very crucial trait: the confidence to perform to the best of her abilities. Confidence that another one of her classmates seemed to have an abundant quantity of. Ojiro Masharo looked down at his paper, the name of his choice already written neatly. There was several reasons, one of them being that he had helped save him from a lot of pain just yesterday. Another being that he wasn't afraid to speak his mind, that much was evident in just 2 days, and the third. He hoped that he might learn a thing or two from the green-haired boy. Izuku looked down at the page, thinking for a moment before scribbling down the name of who he thought would be the best candidate. All right everyone, I will now gather up your votes, and display them on the board for everyone to see. Iida called out, before doing what he said he would, and gathered up the papers, and began to count the votes for all of them. After doing so, he wrote down 2 names on the board. For our vice president, with 3 votes, Momo Yaoyorozu. Iida wrote, before double-checking how work and writing down the next name. Yanaki Hamato is our class president. Iida called out with a smile, seeing as everyone offered a round of applause for the 2 representatives. Wait, what? The newly elected class president yelled out, seeing that he had indeed been elected, with a total of 7 votes. Ay caramba, he muttered, sighing as he slumped into his desk. Oh good, I see that you all decided. Hamato, Yaoyorozu, you are now the people responsible for your class. Aizawa said, climbing out of his sleeping bag as he approached the front of the class once again. You all have lunch, no, go. The man said, watching the surprised faces on his students before they bolted out of the classroom, the man himself beginning his walk to the teacher's lounge. Problem child got elected. I need more coffee, Aizawa groaned. And an aspirin. Her day had been going okay, not great but not bad. I mean, yesterday was an absolute shit show, but what did you expect when she had insufferable classmates like that pompous asshole? Seriously, the just copies quirks and expects to be praised when he does something that the same person could do from the beginning. That's exactly what the asshat did when copied her quirk without asking, and sent the ball several hundred meters in their quirk appreciation test on the first day, and then he shit her a look. The look made her want to stomp over and blow Histo Kingdom Come, only stopping herself when a pair of hands grabbed her from going too far. She still wonders how the Dino Nuggets girl managed to muster enough bravado to hold her back. No one in her old school ever had the moxie to do anything of the sorts. Well, except for her old best friend, but she couldn't go down that rabbit hole, not when she was finally working towards her goal. To become one of the greatest heroes in the world, and then, maybe just maybe, she could finally learn what happened to her friend. But that plan still requires her graduating from UA, and currently she was waiting in line for some food. Beside her was Dino Nuggets, as well as Man Hands. The two were chatting up a storm about some boring shit, her red eyes widening slightly when she noticed the group of people entering the large room. A few catching her eye instantly, like the kid with a literal crow's head, another with a rock head, one had a tail and another had multiple arms. And then her eyes landed on the brunette that she saved during the entrance exam, the pieces coming together in her head. This was her sister class, Class 1A. Oh look, guess Class 1A could finally join us. The orange-haired girl that was recently appointed as the class's representative, the girl being elected after being able to sign the pompous asshole. Yeah, about time. I was wondering when I'd get to see all the new cuties. Dino Nuggets said, wiggling her eyebrows. Ah, now she remember why she had so much bravado. She was a grade A flirt. If it breathed, she flirted. Whatever. Katsumi shrugged, finally getting taught he front of the line and getting the food. The man smiled behind his gas mask and chef hat. Extra spicy, just how you like it, correct? The man asked, putting down some curry that smelled like death. She smirked, nodding before taking her tray and found an empty table, sitting down as two new acquaintances soon followed suit, sitting down beside her. Girl, you're gonna hurt yourself with that, Dino Nuggets said, gesturing at the slurry that was currently producing a spicy aroma that was visible. Nah, you're all just a bunch of wimps, she cockily said, taking a large bite as she smiled. The lunch guy definitely knew how to cook food. Before another word could be said, a girl with a brown bob cut and permanent blush marks walked up to the group, having a somewhat nervous smile on her face as she looked at the other girls. Hi, can I join? She nervously asked, the group falling silent as a collective thought ran through everyone's heads, must protect. Round cheeks. Take a seat. Katsumi was the first to speak, getting a grateful look from the new girl as she took a step in front of Bakugo. Hi, name's Setsuna Tokage, nice to meet you. The dino girl gave a toothy smile as she offered a hand to the gravity girl. Ochako Uraraka. Nice to meet you. She gave a beaming smile, her eyes widening when she smelled the spicy curry that was in the area. Whoa, wow. She muttered, her nose wrinkling cutely at the food. Oh great. You're another wimp. I was hoping you'd at the very least gave the galls to try it. Katsumi snorted, taking another bite as the smaller girl squeaked indignantly, shaking her head adamantly. Spicy things don't mix well with me, she muttered, getting a hum from Bakugo as she paid no more mind to her thoughts on her food. So how come none of your class has shown up for the first two lunches? Katsumi asked, breaking the silence. Or the assembly for that matter. She grunted. Well we had a quirk apprehension test. Our teacher is like, really scary. He almost expelled one of us the first day. Actually. He expelled someone earlier. She muttered. And yesterday we had our first heroics lesson, and well, it kinda went longer than expected. The girl bashfully said, remembering that the day prior's events that led to them not having lunch with everyone else. Oh yeah, what happened? The orange-haired girl asked, her teal eyes now held a shine of curiosity in them. We had an accident where one of my classmates overused his quirk, and well, almost collapsed a building on top of his teammates. Oh, the red giant is in my class, Uraraka suddenly said, remembering one of the main topics she wanted to tell her new friend. Wait, the red giant? Like from the video? Tokage asked, getting an immediate nod from the gravity-defying girl. He's pretty cool too. I mean I haven't really had the chance to talk to him, but he seems pretty cool. He was elected class president too, she excitedly said, the girls comparing her to a happy puppy. Oh, and he has a dual quirk too. It's pretty awesome. That statement got the immediate attention of someone else that was passing by the table. A dual quirk, huh? Of course the asses of 1A get all the powerful quirks. A blonde with a smug face said, carrying a tray of foods, his smirk never fading as he looked down at the grown-haired girl. Then again, they didn't put me in that course, so maybe 1A isn't all that great. The newcomer said, his rant coming to a close as he received 3 death glares from 3 different people. Monoma, shut up, Kendo said, making the boy shiver up and disappear. He would rather receive another neck chop so soon after the latest one. Ignore the he's a tiny dick loser. Katsumi grunted, her crude language making Tokage snort and Uraraka choke on her food. Anyways, she muttered, not sure what else to say. Wait, you said he had a dual quirk. You mean like he has two separate quirks? The dino girl asked, sticking her fork into her piece of meat. I mean kinda, not sure I'm the best to explain it. But he can like summon these different weapons, kind like the old school ninja weapons from the movies. Uraraka explained, he made these like large fork-looking weapons, and those let him make this weird energy around him and grow super big. The girl said, using her hands to explain her thoughts animatedly, playing charades almost. Say maybe, Kendo asked. She had an Yu's tanding about different martial arts, considering her parents owned and ran their dojo. I don't know, maybe, I'll ask him next time I see him. The gravity girl happily said, taking another bite of her food with a smile. What about you? Have you guys had any heroics lessons yet? She asked, looking at the explosive girl. Yeah, just our homeroom teacher making us running drills. Nothing special. Katsumi shrugged, jabbing her spoon into the curry, her red eyes looking over her acquaintances for a moment. Although we have another class later today, so who knows, maybe it'll actually be interesting. Maybe. I hope nothing happens, Uraraka said with a sunshine smile, before her brown eyes widened. Oh, I didn't finish what I was saying about Hamato. She muttered, gaining confused looks from the other girls. The red giant, she clarified, getting a hum in response from Katsumi before she continued. But he's like a total ninja, his hero costume reminded me of one too. She said, remembering how cool she thought the green-haired boy's costume was. A ninja, for real? Kendo asked, leaning over slightly to get a better view of the brown-haired girl. I know, totally wild, right? When I first saw him I thought he'd be just another guy who bashes stuff, you know. But nope, you should have him fight Aizawa-sensei, it was awesome. He kept doing these insane flips and actually beat him. Uraraka animatedly said, using her hands to tell the story. Wait, who's your homeroom teacher? Ours is the blood hero Vlad King. The dino girl asked, her eyebrow raised. I think I heard people call him Eraserhead. Katsumi's eyes went wide as she began to choke on her curry, coughing violently as she desperately tried to regain her composure. Eraserhead, are you kidding me? She asked, finally to speak after a few moments. Yeah, do you know him? The gravity girl innocently asked. Know him? The dude's the unspoken #1 underground hero, has more captures than Endeavor and hardly loses. You're saying this Hamato guy took him down without a quirk? The explosive blonde asked, standing up slightly. Without his quirk? Tokage asked, the conversation beginning to fly over her head. It's in his name, dumbass. He can erase the quirks of people that are in his area. Katsumi explained, waiting expectantly at Uraraka. I guess so. I saw him form his weapons for brief moments, I was wondering why they kept disappearing though. She muttered, looking down slightly. Damn, wouldn't mind going around with that bastard. Katsumi muttered, thinking that she might have finally found someone that would give her a challenge. No offense, but these two are child's play. No offense, how is that not offensive? Dino Nuggets yelled out, standing up slightly as she spoke. Not my fault you're weaker than me, get better. Katsumi shrugged, going back to her food. I'll show you who's weak. Tokage yelled, trying to jump forward only to be held back by an equally irritated Kendo. Easy girl, save it for the next combat training. Kendo said, patting the lizard girl as she calmed down. Hey, wait a second, how do you know about underground heroes? Aren't they like supposed to be unknown? Are you planning on going underground? The orange-haired girl asked. Me, underground. Katsumi laughed, shaking her head. Nah, my quirk doesn't really work for the underground. Besides, I've got my eyes on the #1 spot, going underground doesn't really work for that. Bakugo began to say, I know about the guy cause my friend used to be obsessed with heroes, even underground heroes. He had more merchandise than I think everyone in this school combined. She said with a small fond smile, that smile falling slightly before shaking off her emotions. "Oh really? That's cool I guess," Tokage muttered, turning around to face the blushing girl. "Say, is he single? I'd love to get my hands on a boy who knows martial arts," the lizard girl said with a smirk, leaning down as she got into Uraraka's personally bubble. "Tell him I'm interested, won't ya?" she continued, smirking slightly, only to stop when the big sister of Class 1B gave her a look. Stopping instantly, she straightened her posture, sitting tall as she knew the consequences of going against Kendo, and she'd rather not have a neck chop, thank you very much. Sure. Oh, he can also teleport," Uraraka cheerfully announced. "Way to change the subject, girl. Teleport. Okay, I'll bite. Sounds neat." Katsumi shrugged, finishing off her meal, leaning back slightly as she did so. He can make these swords that him make portals. It's really cool. I'd love to try it one day. A few of my other classmates have already gone through the portal. Do you think he'll let me try it if I ask?" Uraraka asked, shifting her head towards the orange martial artist, only to receive a shrug in response. To Katsumi, however, the world around her began to slow down. Her red eyes zeroing in on Uraraka's, her breath hitched at her words. "These portals, were they blue?" she hesitantly asked, needing to know if there was even a slight chance that this was who she thought it might be. "Oh yeah, how do you know?" Uraraka asked, making the girl's heart skip a few beats. Was it possible? But before she could speak another word, everyone in the cafeteria began to riot, standing up instantly as they began to make a mad dash for the exits. "Oh, what the is going on?" Katsumi yelled, grabbing a hold of the sleeve of one of the third years. "It's the perimeter alarm. Someone's broken into UA. This never happened before during my 3 years." The third year yelled, breaking away from the hold and made a rush for the exit, only to be swallowed up by the crowd in return. The hell would be dumb enough to break into UA? Katsumi asked, beginning to go forward into the crowd with her small group. Inside of the crowd, a certain electric user was yelling as he tried to locate his friends, being separated when things went south. "Hamato, Shinso, Jiro, where are you guys?" Kaminari yelled out, feeling someone shoulder check him as he stumbled forward, right into the body of someone else. "Bolt, the hell's going on?" Jiro yelled, her hands covering her jacks protectively. "I don't know. Me, Shinso and Hamato were eating lunch, then the alarms blared, and we got separated." Kaminari yelled, making his way to the purple-haired girl, only to spot another head of purple that was curled around himself nearby. "Shinso, over here," he yelled out, only to get no response as the more reserved teen seemed to be closing in on himself. "Something's not right," he muttered, grabbing Jiro by the wrist and made their way over towards the other teen. The purple-haired boy's breaths were rapid and his eyes were unfocused. It looked like as if he's having a panic attack, Jiro unhelpfully said, jerking her wrist free and crouched beside the brainwash user. "Shinso, hey Shinso, can you hear me?" Kaminari asked, following suit as he got in the field of vision of the panicking teen. "It's Kaminari, you know, the annoying guy that you secretly love like a brother," the electric user asked, a smile cracking his lips as he tried to get the boy to respond to his words. "I got nothing else," he said, shrugging to the girl beside him. She shot him a slight glare. Clearly he had no ideas on how to help someone in this situation, not like her. "Shinso, listen to me very carefully. Do you know where you are?" Jiro asked, he jacks pressing against the boy's skin delicately, using her quirk slightly to help ground him. It took a moment, but she got a shaky nod in response. "That's good. Now, I want you to name 3 things you feel." "Floor, wall, your ears," he whispered, his eyes slowly beginning to refocus on his surroundings. She gave him a small smile. "All right, that's really good. Now, I want you to saw 4 things you can see," she continued, chancing a glance at Kaminari who was giving her wide eyes. "You, the blonde idiot, students, Iida flying in the air," Shinso answered, making the other 2 snap their heads up only to see the robot teen flying through the air. "Attention. Apparently Iida had a microphone as well. There is no need to worry. It is only the press. So please, Calm yourselves and show why we, as students of UA, are considered the best and return to your classes in an orderly fashion. The student yelled out, stopping the masses with his small speech, everyone chancing a glance at the windows only to see that it was indeed the press. Jiro's eyes scanned through the windows, her black eyes scanned the area, locking onto the walls of UA that she was told could withstand almost anything. It was now reduced to mere rubble. Something, or someone had destroyed the gate. She wasn't the one interested in such a feat either. No, several other students were mourning about it as they dispersed from the crammed hallway. Hey man, are you okay? Kaminari asked, snapping Jiro's attention back to the two boys. Yeah, I just don't do well in crowds. Didn't think I'd have another one of these though, thanks, Shinso muttered in response, getting up from the floor only to realize that they were one short from their group of 3. Where's Hamato? He was just with us. Shinso asked, not receiving an answer. Aizawa stormed into the principal's office for the second day in a row. There were many things about Aizawa that everyone knew, such as don't mess with his students, insult his wife and you'll most likely end up in a hole that's worse than any prison. But most of all, was that he hated being in his boss's office. The manimal was a hyper-intelligent being that would disarm nuclear bombs for fun if he was permitted to, thank his melatonin that he wasn't. Ah, Aizawa, to what do I, Nezu began to say, getting cut of when a folder was slammed against the sturdy desk of the principal. The press was just a distraction, I should have known a simple reporter could never have destroyed the gate. Aizawa began, taking a seat in front of the rodent. Using the chaos that such an incident would surely bring, someone could potentially infiltrate the facility with little to no trouble. And with the lack of order the students had, their infiltration was even more hidden. When I returned to the teacher's lounge after dealing with the reporters, I immediately found that some files had been tampered with. I believe this is what they were after, the tired man said, gesturing to the folder that laid on the desk. Without another word, Fluffy Paws took the information, black beating eyes narrowing slightly as the bear's fur stuck up slightly. This is quite concerning, Aizawa. Are you positive that someone managed to infiltrate my school? Such a feat is far from an easy task. I'm positive, and not only that, I believe that someone had intercepted them before they could find everything they were after. I also noticed that the coffee maker was destroyed, sliced through by the looks of it. Aizawa continued, rubbing his wedding band with his thumb as he grounded himself. Nezu, I don't just think that someone got their hands on this information, I know they did. He finished, looking right into the eyes of the small white mouse that was dressed to a T. I see. Indeed, this is quite concerning. What are you proposing we do then? Nezu asked, closing the information, leaning back in his large chair. We need to postpone the USJ. I'm aware that it's important for them to learn about resume situations, but I'm afraid that won't be possible. Nezu firmly stated, cutting off Aizawa. If they truly do have this information, it is imperative that you and your class show up. Because if you don't, and they realize that they've been found out, it could potentially be worse. Worse. Nezu, what the hell are you? Aizawa tried to speak, only to be cut off once again. Let's suppose that he postponed the trip, and the USJ is indeed compromised. There is a 43% chance of someone being gravely injured should the worst come to worst. The chances of them just rolling over and quitting is low, which would most assuredly lead them to attacking the closest new target. UA itself. The probability then increases from 43% to over double. There will be a 92% chance that multiple people will be injured or worse. Aizawa stayed silent, mulling over the words his boss just told him. But, they're just kids. They're not ready for this kind of situation. Are you really suggesting I just roll over and endanger my students, Nezu? Exclamation mark quote. The man asked, a hint of anger in his voice as his quirk flared briefly. Nezu shook his head. I would never intentionally endanger my students, not without proper precautions of course. Nezu chirped, a small smile on his face. We already planned for All Might to oversee this lesson, we'll just simply give you a larger observation party. I believe you, All Might, Midnight, Present Mike, and of course, 13 will be more than able to handle anything thrown your way. This did very little to settle the dread that was forming in his gut. Over the years he had learned to trust his judgment in situations like these. His gut had never steered him wrong. But what was he supposed to do? He couldn't do anything. Nezu was correct, no matter how much he wished that wasn't the case. So he kept the words that desperately wanted to try and convince Nezu to still cancel the trip on his tongue, instead turning on his heels and exited the office. Shota. Nezu spoke out, stopping the man mid-step. The rodent hardly ever called anyone by their first name. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I promise you I will do everything in my ability to ensure the safety of all of UA students, that includes everyone else who studies in this building. Nezu finished, giving a small smile, making Aizawa's eyes widen. The rodent had a plan, and damn it, his plans usually worked out in the end, even if his actions were questionable. Just like right now. Giving a stiff nod, Aizawa exited the room, sighing as he prepared himself for the trials to come. The USJ. It was just as he feared. The grip on his capture weapon tightened as he looked down below him. A portal filled the area. Dozens upon hundreds of thugs filled the area. A small ting of fear crept into the rugged man's heart. Not fear for himself, fear that he wouldn't be able to properly protect those who he gave a solemn vow to protect. The midst continued to expand. A pale hand stretch outward formed the black fog. The man it connected to stood tall. The unknown villain had multiple severed hands all over his body, covering his face, keeping his true identity hidden. All Might wasn't even here like he promised. The blonde oaf had already used up his limit. It was just him, his two closest friends and a rescue hero against an unknown number of villains. His students didn't even know what was happening. They believed this was just part of the training. He was about to jump into the fray, hearing the commotion that was happening when his class realized this wasn't training, not anymore. And then his resident problem child walked up to him, sword in hand as he pointed them down at villains. Day of the entrance exam. The woods that surrounded UA has many folklore surrounding the area, from reports of weird noises to even supposed sightings of mythical creatures. These tall trees easily made people look like ants. The wildlife running rampant from deers prancing through thick grass, to birds perching on branches. This place was the sanctuary for many students and heroes alike. For those with nature quirks it helped them feel at peace, or people with animal and or predators quirks, helped them calm their instincts. This was the case for UA's very own Inyu Ryo, or more commonly known as the hero hound dog, a man with a mutation quirk that gave him many attributes of a dog. This resulted in the man being bullied and ridiculed in his younger years, leading to him developing anger issues that he soon learned was a danger to both himself and others. The muzzle he wore wasn't just for looks, no, it was also for the protection of both himself and anyone who might have angered him. The muzzle was also a fashion statement if anyone asked, which was often. When he entered UA, his school guidance counselor immediately noticed his shortcomings, and helped him rein in his anger most days. If it wasn't for that man, then the hero hound dog would be very different than who he was today. This event also led him to become licensed in therapy and student guidance. The man was running on all fours, the radio in his ears suddenly coming to life as the sound of a high-pitched creature spoke from the other end. Mr. Ryo, it seems that there's a dispute nearby you. Would you be so kind as to de-escalate the situation? Mr. Principal asked, the dog man already knowing his boss was undoubtedly sipping on some tea. No problem, Ruff, Hound Dog replied, bending his knees as he sprung forward, moving through the forest at immense speeds. Perhaps if the man had stayed even just another second, he would have seen the black mist that began to form where he once stood. The fog began to expand, until a large circle was created, 3 bodies exiting the black abyss, the sound of a twig snapping when his heeled boot stepped onto the uneven floor. Soon the midst began to contract, a pair of bright yellow eyes making themselves known, the outline of a person forming as the cloud condensed. Master Tamura, it seems you were correct, no one is patrolling this area. A man with pale and flaky skin smiled behind his mask being that of a severed hand that was preserved. His blood-red eyes shining with all intentions as he smiled, his lips cracking just from the motion. Like I said, all the heroes will be busy dealing with all the brats, leaving us with the perfect opportunity to get what we want. The man said, addressing his comrades as he addressed them. Our objective isn't that far away, if we go now, we should successfully find our target, and leave without a worry. The hand man said, looking over at the two newcomers. Don't mess this up, and my master has assured you we'll have your son back. Tamura Shigaraki said, his fingers twitching at the urge to destroy, a common feeling that he often gave into. Spotting a nearby tree, he first placed his palm against the mighty oak, then one finger, and another, until he pressed his fifth finger. A spider web of cracks emerged from the touch, the large tree that stood for generations, beginning to crumble at the slightest touch, until there was nothing except dust. Let's hope you don't disappoint me or my master. Not like that last one's did at least. The man threatened, snapping his attention back to his objective, the small device on his wrist showing a highlighted target. He's this way, the man said, beginning to lead his party into the forest, the girl complaining about her boots being ruined. Damn devas. You said we'd get our son back. When? Because he's most likely here trying out for Ua, why not get him now? The woman asked, her features covered in a full-face mask, with electronic lights to make up her eyes. She wore a tight black bodysuit, covering her entire body in the snug material. Around her hips was a kama, going down to her mid-thighs that contained holsters for the taser she always carried. Her black hair was down in a ponytail that erupted from the back of her mask, a yellow highlights being visible in both her hair and suit itself. Your son's trying to be a hero. Figures. The man snorts, his amusement quickly turning to announce at the person's question. And we'll get your brat when master says so. The man said, leaving no room for further arguing as they continued on their quest. The hand man had pale blue hair, violent red eyes and a lanky body. Severed hands not only covered his face, but also his entire body as well. His shoes were red, his favorite color, and he wore basic black clothes as well. And what if we don't want to wait that long? Another voice spoke up, the final ember of their party finally making their voice known. He wore a very similar design to the woman, a tight black bodysuit with yellow accents, hair adorned the top of his head, his mask leaving parts of his forehead exposed. His palms crackled with yellow electricity as he spoke, daring the man-child to say something he didn't like. Then I guess master will have 2 more quirks to his personal library. Tamura said, hiding his smirk at the two's tensed posture. His master was a man that you didn't want to mess with, his quirk being the great seat this world had ever produced, and he wasn't afraid to use it. Now, unless you want to argue further, I believe, he began to say, his words falling short as the ground around them shook violently, his feet collapsing beneath him as he fell. The hell was that? He asked, licking himself back up as he dusted himself off. Kurogiri. What was that? The man demanded. I do not know, Master Tamura. Perhaps we were mistaken that there wouldn't be anyone patrolling right now. The midst man supplied, his foggy hands shaking slightly as he answered. His young charge wasn't one to cross when he was angry. Just as Shigaraki was about to shout, yell or most likely decay something, the woman piped up. I can feel electrical currents coming from that way, the woman said, cutting the man-child off from his tantrum. High levels too, almost like as if, the woman began, her eyes widening before she banged to run full spring through the forest, not caring about disturbing the wildlife as she went. Where the hell are you going? Shigaraki roared, chasing after his subordinate with high speed, the midst man disappearing with the other man. After a few seconds the crusty man came up to the woman, her stance wavering slightly as the man's eyes widened. Right before them was a colossal robot close to 60 meters tall, its back was against the ground, an impact crater surrounded the metal beast. Its single glowing red eyes was dimming as it spotted the 2 villains, 4 villains after the midst man reappeared beside the other 2. It's beautiful, the woman muttered, her finger involuntarily twitching as her quick itched to be used. Maybe this could help us, the pale man said, smiling evil behind the mask, turning back to woman. Do your thing, create chaos, he said, his smile wide as the woman walked up to the behemoth, her gloves coming off as she placed her palm against the cool metal. Her brown eyes shined bright yellow as electricity began to emerge from her body, connecting to the machine as a yellow glow enveloped the robot. The pistons extending as power began to course through the body, machines expanding and upgrading as it began to rise once again, its body expanding as its red eyes glowed a vibrant yellow. "Go, find my son, and bring him back to us," she commanded the robot, watching as it took big strides, entering a nearby city, crushing its walls. Shigaraki watched on with a cruel smile. All the pain and chaos that was made, it brought him immense joy. "Nothing like watching brats be killed," he said with a slight amount of giddy, imagining the bloodshed that was undoubtedly caused. "I ordered it to find my son. That should get their attention, and if all goes well, we won't worry your master about such a task," the woman said, a bit of ire in her voice as she watched her creation go. The hand man gave a tisk in response, but even he wasn't too angry about this discourse. She was correct, and if it succeeded, then his master would have less work to do in the future. "Fine. Move along. Our objective is still," the man stopped, his red eyes widening when he saw a sight he didn't think he'd ever see again. Flashed of blue tore through the sky, the slight glint of metal abusing the sun caught his eye as the form of someone was seen. Before he could even utter a word, the flash of blue disappeared, instead the form was falling through the sky, until a red energy began to encase the body. A sadistic smile replaced his previous look, his fingers twitching as he clenched his fists. His eyes widened when the energy focused, creating an astro body that was completely made of translucent red. The form grew in size, surprising the man slightly as he watched. Kurogiri's pure yellow eyes did something similar, widening as the first punch was delivered, knocking the robot back. And then what happened next was nothing short of powerful, cocking his fist back as it began to spasm, its size increasing before pushing forward. The large fist made contact with the head of the zero-pointer, crushing the robot almost instantly. Even though the four villains were a considerable distance away, they could feel the shockwave from such a powerful attack. The smile began, the hand only grew, turning to his getaway man before speaking. "Kurogiri, get us out of here. Master will want to hear about this," the leader of the group said. The midst man complied to the orders, his body expanding until a portal was created. "We'll have other opportunities to secure our objective," he said before stepping through the portal. Unknown location. A small man with a bushy mustache was busy preparing his lab for his newest play toy. His thick glasses rested on his nose as he double-checked all his research. The small black pet he kept around him at all times was neatly placed under his feet, sleeping peacefully as the doctor looked through yet again his files. "They should be returning with your new brother, my pet," the man said, gently rubbing his fingers against the black skin of its chin. No sooner had he said that, did a black mist begin to form in his lab. The man excitedly jumped out of his chair. His smile was cruel as he waited for his master's minions to come, though his smile fell however when he realized they came back empty-handed. "Where's the specimen?" the doctor asked, failing hold back his displeasure at the fact he didn't have his promised goods. "We didn't get him, but we did find something much more interesting," Shigaraki said, his attention solely focused on the small TV that was located in the corner of the room. The screen showed nothing but static, captions on the bottom of the screen contrasting the snow that read, "Captions only." "Tamura, why did you fail to deliver our good doctor's newest material?" a voice asked through the TV screen, a collective chill running down everyone's spines. The voice was enough to make even the most dangerous of people shiver at the mere sound. His presence leaked through the video screen, making the woman squirm slightly. "You didn't fail at your mission, did you, boy? Because you know the consequences for failure, do you not?" the voice said. "I know, master," the pale man said, dropping to his knees on instinct, his head bowed in a sign of both respect and submission. But Deku, he's returned," Shigaraki finally managed to say, making both the doctor and voice stop. "Deku, you say?" the screen asked after a moment of silence, before a low chuckle was geared. Meanwhile, in a dark location with several screens and a large chair, a chair meant for a king. He sat in the chair, his smile being the only prominent feature, the rest of his face completely scarred over from an attack that would have killed any other being. "Well done, Tamura, well done indeed. We'll acquire our good doctor's specimen at another time," the man said, his smile growing as he let out another laugh, this laugh promising nothing but pain and suffering. Leaning forward against his chair, the scarred man spoke. I finally found you. Then. The room was completely white, the walls being in pristine condition and everything inside the confined space was ensured to make sure it was sterilized. The room wasn't an ordinary room. No, it could be considered an operating room, or as the good doctor called it, his laboratory. What did the man study in his laboratory? The only thing that truly excited him, of course, quirks. Or more specifically, the practice of both extrapolating these unique gifts and duplicating such powers for his own malicious purposes. By day he was the head medical practitioner of the children wing of Japan's #1 hospital. But by night, he was all for one's most trusted subordinate, his practices being one of the main reasons why the Lord of Great Evil had so much influence in this world of superhuman beings. His own quirk, life force, allowed him to live decades upon decades at this point. He was born in a small town just a few hundred miles away from Chingching, China, the place where the first documented quirk was discovered. It took the man decades before he properly discovered he had one of these peculiar abnormalities that quickly began to dominate the human genome. His practices in medicine being for the sole purpose of understanding how such a miracle could occur within the human body. Throughout his long lifespan, he discovered a few key features, such as the human body's natural ability to adapt and evolve over time, or that there were myths and legends about superhuman individuals long before the dawn of quirks. Oh, how he wished that those periods of time were properly documented, perhaps he could finally understand the truth. But he knew one thing was for certain, the world was due for another big change. A change that could make even his master's quirk obsolete given time. In front of the doctor was a boy, no older than 8, strapped to a bed, his body completely restrained as he slumbered. His green hair dropped to his side, showing just how exhausted he undoubtedly was. A small, traitorous part of the doctor's heart felt for the boy. He did nothing wrong, yet he was the key to so many questions the doctor had. So he pushed those feelings away as he began his work, taking various samples of the boy's DNA. The screams the boy gave would remain imprinted on his brain for the rest of his life. He knew his quirk would be truly magnificent. If only his master hadn't waited so long to acquire the specimen, then perhaps he would understand everything so much clearer. Immediately the first thing he began to do was attempt to duplicate the boy's quirk, quickly finding out that his usual methods held to value as the sample deteriorated in an instant. Interesting. Very interesting. The man mused, taking one of the vials of blood, putting a small sample into a microscope as he began to take a closer look at the sample. The doctor's eyes widened behind his glasses, his lips curling upwards as he double-checked his results. His smile only grew as he confirmed his findings, truly magnificent. He said, looking back over to the boy with a smile, the limp body shifting slightly as he groaned, a soft whimper escaping his lips as he twisted, undoubtedly aggravating some of his injuries. "Good doctor, I trust you have news on our newest guest?" A man asked, his presence being enough to send most people into a state of uncontrollable fear. Everyone who crossed him didn't live to tell the tale, we'll all except for one, but that idiot would be dealt with in due time. The man had gray eyes, snow-white hair and a powerful build, all neatly tucked away in a simple black suit with polished shoes. "Indeed, this boy is just as I thought, he's the next step in our evolution," the doctor said, turning around in his chair as he met the gaze of his master. "Oh, is that so? Perhaps I waited too long in acquiring the boy then," the man mused, humming slightly as he strode over to the unconscious boy, his hand outstretched as he brushed away a few strands of green hair. "Tell me your findings, doctor. I'm already aware that his quirk is a mutation emitter hybrid, but surely that isn't enough to warrant such excitement." "Is it, doctor?" the devil known as All for One asked, his gaze now meeting his trusted minion. "I know I do not need to explain the quirk singularity theory to you, master, but as you know, quirks are steadily growing stronger and stronger with each generation. Both you and I have witnessed this phenomenon firsthand, but this boy, he exceeds everything that should be possible for his generation," the doctor explained, gesturing to his computer screen that showed a model of a quirk factor. Spirals of blue, red, orange and purple swirled around a green core, crackling with untold power and potential as they merged together, creating an even stronger bond. "From the moment I saw his quirk factor, I knew he was the key to everything I had been searching for." "Explain," The white-haired man, walking closer to the doctor to get a better view of the screen. Our newest projects, the Nomus, I discovered that the human body can only hold to many quirks before the mind gives out. The hard limit is 3, yet this boy, he doesn't just have one quirk factor, he was 4 separate quirks that somehow merged into a single unit. Dr. Garaki explained, his smile growing as he continued. The solution that we have been looking for is inside the boy's DNA. Theirs is also something else as well, the man said, picking up a file to show his master the results to a series of tests he did earlier. Good doctor, is this what I think it is? The great evil known as All for One asked, his grip on the folder tightening slightly. His gray eyes widening at the implication that his trusted subordinate was saying. You were right, there is a 4th type of quirk factors in the world. For decades I looked for the signs, extra genomes, hidden secondary quirks, but I never found what you were looking for. Until now, Garaki said, pulling up another screen on his monitor, this one showing a live image of the kidnapped boy. The camera had a lens that was able to read energy outputs. May I introduce the power type, perhaps a bit on the nose, but I couldn't help myself, master. His quirk isn't simple weapon manifestation, I already knew that could access various abilities through his weapons, such as teleportation. Only this was beyond what I could have ever hoped for. His quirk allows him to generate an immense power source that he's able to cultivate into these weapons, channeling the same energy in different way depending on the weapon. Master, it's possible that his quirk can't just do that. I theorize that with the right tools, he could use his energy to infuse these powers onto other weapons. Imagine it, master. Our Nomus armed with these very same weapons, the ability to teleport to anywhere on the world, there would be no one who could stand in your way. Garaki finished. The master's smile grew at each word, imagining a future where his rule was truly omnipotent, his word being law, and anyone who dared oppose him, well, those people would no longer exist. Doctor, you will be compensated for such achievements in my goal. This boy, erase his history, no one can know about him, nor what his quirk was. All for One said, striding over to the unconscious boy as he placed a palm on his forehead. Do you need the quirk to be inside the boy for future tests, or is it irrelevant which body the quirk inhabits? The man asked, getting a shake of the head from the doctor. No, master, although, I recommend keeping him alive for the meantime, in case there are complications. Always thinking ahead, that's one of your best qualities. All for One said, pressing his palm to the boy's forehead, pushing his quirk forward as he began to steal the quirk. Red tendrils began to emerge from the man's hand and wrist, wrapping themselves around the boy's head as he began the process. Emerald green eyes shot open, his body writhing around at the sensation of his quirk being forcefully ripped away from his body. And then, something very interesting happened. All for One had always thought of himself as a god among mortal men. The ability to steal anyone's abnormalities could definitely plant that thought in anyone's mind. In his centuries of being alive, he had only encountered one quirk that refused to be swayed by his power, refusing to leave its host. That same exact problem was reoccurring to the man. His grip tightened around the boy's forehead, his red tendrils increasing violently in size as he braced his arm with his left. Beads of sweat began to form on the man's temple, his teeth gnashing against each other as he willed the boy's quirk to complex to his orders. Inside the boy's body you could see red energy beginning to surround the spirals are blue, red, orange and purple, the spirals protecting a multicolored center, the colors connecting making a green hue in contrast. The red tendrils began their assault once again, failing to reach the center of the core, instead each tendril was destroyed by one of the spirals. With one final push, the tendrils merged to create one giant, unstoppable force that would surely destroy the 4 guardians, reach the center and take what was his. Instead of submitting, the 4 spirals began to intertwine around each other, their individual colors being forgotten as they took up one singular color, green. With an equally destructive force, the untamable spiral of pure unbridled energy met the giant red tendril head one, forcing the foreign forces out of its host. All for One instinctively shot his hand back, the screams of the boy slowly dying down as his eyelids fell once more, sending him to a deep sleep. Instead of being annoyed, the villain merely laughed. The sound was jovial and joyous, a sharp contrast to the usual expressions that the man always had, his stone-cold demeanor shattering after his failure to acquire the quirk factor. The doctor looked on with concern. He had never seen his master in such a way before, and currently, he was fearful for his safety. "Doctor, do you have any idea what you brought me? He is far more special than even you pegged him for," the villain said, looking down at the boy with envy. "All my life, I never had the problem of wishing for something. With the exception of my brother, I have never envied someone for something I couldn't have. I always wondered what it would feel like to covet something I couldn't have. You've given me that feeling," he said, his smile still present. "And I finally gained some understanding as to why One for All has escaped my reach for so long. To think, I might actually have to practice my quirk. It's quite exciting," All for One said, looming over the green-haired boy. "Prepare him for every test imaginable. I want to know exactly what makes his quirk so special. And find out a way to replicate it. I believe you're right, this boy is the key to so many problems that I require solutions for. Izuku Midoriya, you are mine," All for One said, not moving as he watched the boy's chest heave. Time skip, brought to you by the GOAT. Blood-red eyes looked down at the counter with great disdain, his fingernails digging into the polished plank that made up the bar. Beside him was a glass of flavored water that had a high percentage of electrolytes in it. A side effect from his quirk being that his body naturally dried out easily, especially after using his quirk, which he currently had an animalistic craving to do right now. This whole situation was unknown to him. He always had free rein to use his quirk, whether that was destroying walls or bones. The point was that he could do whatever he wanted, and right now, he desperately wanted to get back his player too. Ever since he saw his old friend, that wasn't something he could really call the younger boy, considering that he left his handprint on his shoulder blade. Yet a small, desperate part he thought he killed years ago yearned for such a relationship with someone, anyone. The boy unlocked a part of the man's heart that was previously thought to long be eradicated. That's what made him such a dangerous opponent, yet powerful ally. His master said that the boy was special, that much Tamura Shigaraki could understand. How important he didn't know. His sensei kept many secrets from him, and that's probably why he was so restless these last few weeks. His usual bodyguard, Nanny, only friend, had left to do some recruitment mission. Why sensei thought they needed more manpower was a mystery to the handyman, a mystery that he desperately wanted answers for. It wasn't like sensei didn't tell him anything, he just didn't tell him everything he wanted to know. Like why his player 2 left in the first place, where he went, or why the hell they aren't storming UA for him. He slammed his hands on the bar, his drink spilling over and onto the floor. Tamura didn't say a word as he watched the liquid slowly drip to the hardwood floor, his pinkies elevated to ensure he didn't accidentally activate his quirk. That would just be more work for him and Kurogiri, work that didn't seem worth it. With a defeated sigh, the man stood up, his lanky body walking over to where they kept the cleaning supplies. Grabbing the mop he began to clean, his thoughts wandering back to when he had his player 2. Specifically remembering a time when he had snuck in a game console with him, the two played on it together for hours before finally being caught by the doctor. That was when he was punished. He didn't understand back then, and perhaps he still didn't fully understand why such an action would warrant such punishment, but he supposed it really didn't matter. It was that day when he used his quirk on the boy. For some odd reason, the boy's screams didn't bring the usual sense of contempt. Instead, it felt like his stomach was twisting. The sight of exposed muscle and bones was still fresh on his mind. He knew the good doctor healed the wound, making the boy one of very few people who survived his quirk. It was also when he was forbidden access from Deku, or whatever his real name was, he couldn't remember anymore. Ever since that boy had showed up, his sensei had changed in ways that the man couldn't fully explain. His master was never a caring man, never showed outward emotions of affection. That's why his praises were so special, he hardly ever gave them out. He lived for such praises, the reason why he always pushed himself to be better, ensuring the man who rescued him from the streets would be proud of his work. He hadn't been praised in a long time, but that was okay. He just had to work harder, he just had to. Kill All Might. A smile etched itself upon the man's features, the thought of his hands soaked red in the blood of the #1 hero, that would surely make Sensei happy. The man was lost in his thoughts as the TV in the corner of the room suddenly turned on. Static was all that could be seen, the captions only, at the bottom of the screen. Tamura, I request your presence. The TV said, gaining the young man's immediate attention as he instantly bowed his head out of reflex. Yes, Sensei, Shigaraki said, perhaps with a bit too much emotion in his voice for All for One, but that didn't matter right now. Shigaraki's eyes bulged as he felt something beginning to crawl up his throat. Instinctively he wrapped his hands around his neck, choking sounds vibrating through the empty bar. And then, a sludge-like fluid erupted from the boy's crackled lips, the fluid beginning to encase the man before he suddenly disappeared. The sensation wasn't a pleasant one, and the next thing he knew, he was on his knees attempting to catch his breath. A pair of polished shoes caught his attention. Looking up he caught sight of his sensei. His face was heavily damaged, nothing but scar tissue remediated where his eyes once were, the white hair that used to adorn his scalp being gone. Yet, the man still wore his classic black suit and red tie, still looking as formal as ever. Ah, my apologies, I'm still perfecting my newest quirk, Sensei said, offering his hand to his fallen disciple. Kurogiri should be returning with news. Let us hope this group will acquiesce to my request for assistance. All for One said, pulling his ward to his feet. No sooner had he done that, did a black dog begin to form in front of the pair. Bright yellow slits formed as the midst contracted, creating the form of someone Shigaraki had known from an early age. Ah, Kurogiri, we were just talking about you. I trust you bring me good news. The villain asked, returning to his chair, his non-existent eyes looking over Kurogiri. Sensing a slight bit of hesitation, All for One pressed. Master, Shigaraki began to say, noticing the patches of blood that stained the man's suit. Silence, Tamura. Kurogiri, I asked you a question. All for One pressed, using one of the many quirks he had to gain a grid-like vision. I must assume that Oroku Sake was not interested in what I had to say. The quirk master asked, leaning back into his chair, thinking for a moment before Kurogiri's body suddenly fell forward, yellow eyes fading completely as the fog that made up his body began to calm. A cruel smile made its way upon the villain's face. The presence of him was just as intimidating as the tales told. The portal didn't disappear like it usually did, instead it pulsed before focusing once more. The sound of metal clinked through the portal, making the room that Shigaraki was in sound even quieter than before. The silhouette of someone was beginning to focus, spikes adorned his helmet, a cape flowed behind him as a large metal boot exited the midst, the rest of his body following suit. His armor surrounded the man's vital spots, a large chest plate, gauntlets on his wrists, metal shoulder pads and black wraps made up his attire. His helmet glinted dangerously from the low-hanging ceiling lights, his right eye was clouded over, and what appeared to be burned scars littered his exposed skin. So the tales are true, the warrior said, his stance commanding respect and power. From inside the portal, several forms of various humanoid creatures were vaguely seen. The armored man put a palm out, stopping his subordinates from following him further. The quirk boogeyman of Japan does exist, the man said, taking a menacing step forward, his fist clenching as his gauntlets extended, metal swords emerging from his gauntlets. This man came into my home, and said his master requested my clan's assistance. I find the lack of respect quite unacceptable, the armored man said, his clawed arm festering behind him, before the blades retracted slowly. Why should my clan assist you in your menial tasks? Oroku Sake asked, getting straight to the point. The smile on All for One only grew. Standing up from his seat he descended down the small staircase, until he was right in front of the warrior. Because, I believe we could benefit greatly from each other, the master said, extending his hand forward. Looking down with unamused eyes, the warrior glared at the man, before turning around, walking back towards the portal. The foot does not deal with insolent fools who believe that power is all there is to the world. Menial tasks, how dare you disrespect him that way? Shigaraki yelled, stepping in front of the man who just blew off the master of all quirks. You do not know who you are messing with, child. The armored man said threateningly, the blades from his gauntlets extending slowly, the scraping of metal against metal reverberating through the room. And neither do you. You're just some dame wannabe samurai who thinks he's CA. Before another word could be finished, the smell of blood penetrated the room. The tips of the man's blades were tinted red with blood once more. The samurai were servants of the people, protecting them from yokai and other threats to their well-being. Do I look like a samurai to you? The armored man asked, retracting his blades once more, before walking past the man-child. Consider yourself lucky boy, most people don't live to see my face. The armored man said, taking another step forward, stopping only when he heard someone talk. I see why the Hamatos fear you. All for One said, stopping the armored man in his tracks, his helmet slowly turning, his eyes bore straight through the man's scarred skin. What do you know about them? Oroku Sake asked, turning his whole body this time. The man now had his full undecided attention. Not as much as I would have liked. But I do know about 4 particularly troublesome brothers who are always interfering with your plans. I believe I can help, but only if you help us in return. All for One said, teetering to a small box off to the side. One of my informants recovered this from one of the heroics classes in UA. I'm sure you recognize the symbol embedded in the star. The demon lord asked. Oroku Sake opened the wooden box, eyes narrowing slightly at the metal star. His gloved fingers picked up the weapon before inspecting it. The turtles, he said, before turning back to look at the heavily scarred man. Is that what they're called? I'm you aware the 4 had names, I just know yours. The Shredder if I'm not mistaken. All for One said, his teeth showing as he sensed the portal fluctuating as several entities became restless. Oh, was that not common knowledge? He asked, faking sincerity. Tell your men to stand down, and I'll tell you how beneficial a relationship between us could be. The Shredder narrowed his eyes at the man, his hand clenched tightly before relenting. Takeshi, the man said, the portal vibrating once more as another form walked through, his build large and unnatural. I don't negotiate with people like yourselves, but perhaps you might have some value. He will determine whether or not you're true in your words. Oroku Sake said. The form now fully visible took another step, his foot hitting the cool floor. Large paws hit the ground first, then his body came through. The man had no distinctive human features, instead his exposed skin was covered in an orange and white fur, with black stripes. His pants were snug, as well as having holsters in his hips that contained some type of guns. His top consisted of a light blue shirt, followed by a leather vest that contained layers of ammunition that formed an X shape. The man's head was that of a cat, or more specifically, a tiger, his left eyes covered in an eye patch that undoubtedly had a story connected to it. Master Shredder, the tiger said, his nose flaring as he took in the scent of the room, before nodding. You have my attention, the Shredder said. Day of the UA break-in. Reporters crowded around the area. The man had to scoff at the thought of people being so eager to learn what it was like to learn under All Might. Oh, how this society prided themselves on leaning on a pillar for support, how the world will crumble when that pillar is permanently destroyed, broken beyond repair. The thought brought a cruel smile to his chapped lips. That future would come to pass soon enough, but for now he had objectives he had to complete. The walls of UA were certainly impressive, that much Shigaraki had to admit. With securities like this, it would nearly impossible for him and his team to successfully infiltrate the place without alerting anyone to their presence. Which was exactly why they would announce that they were here, use that precious catchphrase that people clung onto for dear life when it was heard. Oh, the irony, seeing the hope in someone's eyes die instantly when they hear their symbol's words coming from the villains he was sworn to stop. He was wearing a trench coat that concealed his identity, standing away from the crowds until it was the opportune moment to strike. Absent-mindedly he began to pick at the irritated skin around his knuckles, his red eyes catching sight of a blue portal for the briefest of moments. It didn't matter. Deku would be back in his master's custody soon enough, and then he would be rewarded for his efforts. Eventually a scruffy black-haired man stormed through the gates, grabbing 2 students who were being trampled by the press, and ushered them inside. Apparently this didn't sit well to one reporter, as they tried to catch up with them, inadvertently activating the security system, and a giant steel wall rose up, blocking the press away for good. He probably waited several hours before he was given the signal to enact the plan. Walking through the crowd, he paid no attention in remaining inconspicuous. Instead he headed straight for the wall, bumping shoulders with several people along the way. Placing his palm against the cool wall, placing his fingers flush one at a time. First his index, then middle, the ring, and finally pinky. Spider web cracks branched outwards from the point of contact. Hole began to form as chunks of wall began to break away, smashing absent the ground into millions of small pieces. The once tall and mighty wall was nothing but rubble in a matter of seconds, the alarms beginning to blare as the man began to sink away into the crowd, disappearing entirely. From a nearby roof, a woman was looking down using a pair of binoculars. Seeing that the gate was destroyed, she signaled her compatriot to start the next phase. The bartender complied to her orders, his body expanding outward as a black fog began to fill the surrounding area, completely enveloping her. The sensation was something someone might compare to drowning, quite unpleasant, but soon enough her heels clicked against the floor of her target. She was in a decently sized room, with both couches and desks littering the room. To her right was a small kitchen-like area, complete with pantries and even a mini fridge. But that wasn't her mission. No, her mission was located right in front of her. Without wasting any more time, she quickly began to search through one of the desks inside the room, the name tag reading that of Aizawa. Opening one of the last drawers, her brown eyes lit up as she found what she was looking for. Quickly snatching up the files, she began to flip through the student registry, taking quick pictures of all the information inside these precious documents, before moving on to the next folder. Meanwhile, a certain green-haired boy was running down the halls, the hair on the back of his neck up as he sped through the halls looking for something, or someone. Catching a glimpse of a humanoid shape, the teen slid to a halt, grabbing a hold of the door frame as he looked inside the teacher's office. A woman wearing a tight black jumpsuit was standing over one of the many desks. In her hands was a folder that the boy couldn't quite make out. Blue eyes shined brightly as a pair of twin katanas formed, his grip tight as he pointed on of the sharp blades at the unknown woman. "I don't think that belongs to you," Izuku said, hiding his eyes from view. The woman startled slightly, her brown eyes looked over the teen from behind her mask. "Shit," she said, throwing the folder up into the air and scattered various papers around the floor, covering up what she was looking at. "I need extraction now," the intruder yelled, taking a deep breath as she activated her quirk, feeling the nearby electrical lines in the area, her powers zeroing on a nearby coffee maker. The boy was right on her heel, reeling his arm behind him preparing to capture her. "Shit, this is the boy they warned me about," the woman thought, her eyes shining brighter as the machine suddenly shot up into the air, aimed right at the green-haired, freckled hero in training. This action bought her only a few seconds, hopefully more than enough time for her exit plan. The sound of metal cutting metal was heard as the villain's attack was null in vain, as a blue sword flew through the air, its light flickering as she felt a hard impact on her chest. The force from the blow threw her back into on of the nearby walls, and before she could even comprehend what was happening, she felt the cool touch of metal against her throat. The markings on the sword began to shimmer down, the violent blue eyes becoming less radioactive. "Now, are we gonna do this the easy way, or the hard way?" Izuku asked, pressing the blade of his sword hardening against the skin of her neck. Before she could even respond, a black mist began to form around her, a smirk was plastered on her face behind the mask, her posture relaxing. "Sorry hero, but it's high time I bail," she taunted, a feeling of unease in her gut as the floor beneath her disappeared, and she was plunged into darkness. The mist collapsing around her, ensuring that no one else would be caught up in the portal, especially not the green-haired boy. Izuku's eyes widened, his heart skipping a beat as the grip on his handle tightened. His teeth grinded against each other as he turned around. He knew whoever that woman was, she was already long gone. "Damn it," he said to himself, sheathing his swords as he crouched, beginning to look over the scattered pieces of paper that were thrown across the floor, picking up a folder before placing it on the nearby desk. He suspected whatever this lady wanted had something to do with him. His suspicions only increased tenfold when he saw the mist that consumed her. The same mist that would oftentimes fill his nightmares, the same mist that had taken him away from his family all those years ago. The same midst that was the underling of him. Dread began to pool in his stomach, quickly standing up when he suddenly heard voices, disappearing in a flash of blue as Aizawa entered the room. The portal closed behind her as her legs gave out beneath her, her landing far from elegant as she crashed down into the ground. Beside her was a man in a very similar clothing choice, reaching out a hand. She was pulled back up to her feet. "I trust you acquired what we were after?" the TV screen asked, gaining the two's attention. "Yeah, I got the info, it all on here," she said, raising up her phone as the same black fog from earlier reappeared behind them, a man's with pale blue hair walking through. "Excellent, then that means we have much planning to do. Tamura, have you made any progress in recruiting new members?" the screen asked. "Yes sensei, Kurogiri and I have managed to recruit a decent amount," Shigaraki immediately answered, balking his hand into a fist as he imaged the future. "I plan on having them as an overwhelming majority, force the brats to go on the defensive so that they won't realize what's happening," Tamura said, a smile on his face as he explained his plan. "That's an excellent idea Tamura. Prepare them, because soon they will be going up against heroes. It's likely most of them will be captured during our operation. Are they aware of this fact?" All for One asked. "Why tell the NPCs that they're Carter fire?" Shigaraki asked, laughing to himself. "Day of the attack. Sensei, you called for me?" Tamura Shigaraki asked, entering a small medical room that was reserved only for the doctor's experiments or medical procedures. "Ah, Tamura, thank you for coming," the Demon Lord of Japan said, his smile making up most of his face. His hands were behind his back as he gestured towards the nearby table. "I believe it's time you learn some very important lessons about how I conduct myself. Despite what others believe, I find unnecessary bloodshed improper and redundant. After decades of doing just that, you come to realize death means nothing when you do so every day. You take for granted just how precious a dying man's eyes are. To see the realization that their last sight would be you, it's quite a thrill, isn't it?" Yes it is," Shigaraki eventually said, remembering how enjoyable it was to feel blood on his hands, the only remnants of the person who he killed. "As my successor, you must learn how to conduct yourself as well. You could make the same mistake I did, or you could learn from it," All for One said, pulling out a small box, pushing it in front of the young man. "I've had this in development for several months now, only recently has it finally bore fruit," the man said, opening the box to reveal a single red dart. "A simple dart?" Shigaraki asked, about to pick up the dart before his master stopped him. "Not exactly, but I cannot blame you for thinking such. This here is the first batch of Quirk erasing bullets," All for One said, making his young pupil stop in place. His red eyes dilated as he thought about the implications of such a weapon. "Unfortunately the effects aren't permanent yet, but it should do the trick for Deku. Corner him, and ensure that he doesn't interfere with our plans." How long does it last for?" Shigaraki asked, gently picking up the bullet, making sure to not let his fingers anywhere near the needle. "Not long enough for my taste, but this is still only the first batch. The person overseeing this project of mine says that each batch should have increased amounts of time," All for One said, turning around to look at a tank with a body floating in some unknown liquid in it. "You only have that single bullet, and a simple gun wouldn't work for someone like Deku. You saw the footage, he's grown, in both skill and power. I trust that you will find a way for the bullet to reach him," the man asked, looking behind him once more. Gently placing the bullet back into the small box, Shigaraki thought for a moment. "I won't disappoint you sensei," Shigaraki said, closing up the box before waiting for his next orders. "I know you won't, that is all. Go, and Tamura, don't disappoint me, not again," All for One said, sensing as his student left the room, a twisted smile making its way upon his disfigured face. "Finally, everything comes full circle," the man mused to himself. "Everyone shut up," Shigaraki roared, entering a room that contained dozens upon dozens of small to medium level thugs and villains. "You all already know why you're here, so I won't bother explaining it again to a bunch of NPCs. All you need to know is that the attack starts now," he yelled, several figures emerging from the shadows as he spoke, several of them well-known associates of him, others, he knew nothing about them. You will all be separated into different areas that will let you benefit from your predetermined stats. You will each have a commander, and they are these people. Shigaraki yelled. For the water group, meet Zether, he's your commander. Shigaraki said. A humanoid fish with robotic legs stepped forward, his fangs flaring out threateningly. For the ruins area, meet Electro and Grid, they're your superiors. He continued. The two black-wearing villains took steps forward as well. Mountain team, meet Bradford, he's the top dog. Shigaraki roared. A giant skeleton of a beats walked forward, his exposed bones scratching up the neat tile as he walked. Anton and Ivan, they're in charge of the fire team. Two figures stepped forward, on with a large horn that adorned his head, the other looking like a pig. And the rest of you are with me and Tiger Boy. You will be the first attack squad, and we'll make sure no heroes get in our way. Shigaraki yelled, ignoring the low growl coming from beside him. And of course, he have our tank, Nomu. He yelled, pointing towards the black colossal beats that hadn't moved an inch this entire time. Just get out of his way if you know what's best for you. Now, everyone get your loadout ready. Our attack starts now. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.